Hey everyone, welcome back to Mr.X Files. If you're new here, this is the place where we dive into the mysteries that keep you up at night. Whether you're here to relax, fall asleep, or spiral into an existential crisis at 3 in the morning, you're in the right place. Drop a comment, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And yeah, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Alright, let's get into it. Imagine growing up surrounded by things most people only see in magazines. Private jets waiting on the tarmac, sprawling estates with manicured lawns stretching for miles, and family gatherings that felt more like rituals than reunions. To the outside world, it looked like a fairy tale of money and legacy. But for Elias Vance, all that shine masked something dark and suffocating. The Vance family wasn't just rich. They were part of something old. So old, it felt like it had always been there, hiding behind world events, whispering orders into the ears of presidents, kings, and CEOs. The Illuminati. Most people laughed it off, called it a conspiracy cooked up on internet forums. But for Elias, it was no theory. It was his inheritance. Even as a child, Elias sensed something was off. He'd noticed symbols carved subtly into the woodwork of the house, circles, triangles, eyes. He remembered nights where grown-ups in black robes whispered things in candlelight, his father watching with eyes like polished stone. There were words never spoken in daylight, things that felt too heavy for a boy to carry, and yet he did. Victor Vance, Elias's father, was a man who rarely smiled. His presence filled a room like smoke, impossible to ignore, suffocating if you lingered too long. He wasn't abusive, not in the traditional sense, but he ruled with silence and expectation. "We are Vances," Victor would say, sitting across from Elias in his study lined with ancient books. "Our bloodline forged empires. We do not follow. We lead, but we lead through control, and control demands secrecy." Elias wanted to believe, to understand the gravity of it all. But as he got older, questions started eating at him. Why did people disappear after family meetings? Why were there so many late-night calls, tense and hushed, followed by his father drinking alone in silence? Why did every answer feel like another locked door? One night, curiosity pushed Elias past the point of no return. He'd been walking the halls of their country manor, one of many homes they owned, unable to sleep. Something about that night was different. The air felt thicker, like the walls were holding their breath. He stumbled into his father's office, empty for once, and behind the bookshelves found a hidden drawer. Inside, a flash drive. No markings, just cold metal. Back in his room, heart racing, he plugged it into his laptop. What he saw changed everything. Videos, documents, meetings. It was all real. Global leaders bowing their heads. Inventions that could have changed the world, buried, for the sake of profit. Wars not born from hate, but strategy. Sacrifices made like pawns on a chessboard. His family, his own blood, was part of the machinery that decided who lived and who died. And not for ideals, for power. Elias sat frozen for hours, the weight of it all sinking into his chest like wet cement. He thought about his mother, long, gone and barely mentioned. About his little sister, who had disappeared without explanation when he was just 10. Every question he'd ever buried now screamed inside him. The next morning, Victor noticed something different in him. At breakfast, between bites of eggs no one was really hungry for, he said, without looking up, "You opened something, didn't you?" Elias didn't respond, but his hands trembled around his fork. Victor leaned back in his chair, calm as ever. "Do you think you're the first to question it? To want to save the world?" He shook his head, not out of anger, but disappointment. "You are a Vance. That means something. Don't throw it away for the sake of a bleeding heart." But Elias had already made up his mind. The guilt wouldn't let him sleep. The silence of the estate felt louder than ever, and the whispers in the halls now sounded like screams. He began collecting evidence, uploading files anonymously, working with shadows inside the internet, the same way his family operated in the real world. And then came Ava Monroe, a sharp, stubborn, investigative journalist who had chased rumors for years and nearly lost her career for it. Elias reached out with caution. She listened, doubtful at first, until the files started rolling in. She was the only person he could trust, the only one outside the circle who believed him. But the Vances weren't idle. A week after their first encrypted call, someone tried to push Elias off a train platform. Another time, a black SUV tailed him for miles before vanishing. He knew what was coming. Betrayal, his father once said, isn't punished. It's erased. Still, he pressed on. In the end, a private jet went down in a field outside Lisbon. Some reports claimed mechanical failure. Others whispered about a missile. Inside that plane was Elias, or at least, that's what the official record said. But Ava never believed he died. Months later, she received a sealed package. Inside was a burner phone. A single video played, Elias, gaunt but alive, speaking from what looked like an abandoned bunker. If you're watching this, they think I'm dead. Good. That gives us time. This isn't just about my family. It's about all of them, the ones pulling the strings. We've cracked the door open. Now we have to kick it down. The story you're about to read is not just about conspiracies or shadowy powers. It's about a boy raised in silence who chose to speak. About bloodlines that demand loyalty and the rare few brave enough to say no. Turn off the lights. Listen closely. Let the quiet wrap around you, because the truth doesn't just hide in shadows. Sometimes it bleeds through them. He emphasized that last word, discipline, with a quiet warning, like it was the thin line separating greatness from collapse. Elias didn't fully understand it at the time, but something in his father's tone made him feel like failing to grasp that one word would bring shame on more than just himself. It would tarnish the bloodline. By the time he was 8, Elias had begun seeing things he couldn't explain. Strange rituals, hidden chambers, and people who spoke in cryptic tones. Once, during one of the frequent retreats at the family's estate in the English countryside, he wandered from his room late at night, drawn by soft chanting echoing down the hallway. From a crack in the thick oak door of the west wing, a part of the house he was told never to enter, he saw them. Dozens of adults stood in a wide circular chamber lit only by candles. The air was thick with incense that twisted like smoke trails from ancient fires. The floor was carved with symbols, concentric circles, spirals, an eye set inside a triangle at the center tile. Elias's father, Victor, stood at the heart of the gathering, arms raised. Around him, the group chanted in rhythm, the tone low and eerie, like they were calling something forward. Elias backed away slowly, his heartbeat booming in his ears. The next morning, over breakfast, Elias asked quietly, "What were you doing in the West Wing last night?" Victor didn't look up. He simply placed his coffee down and said in a flat voice, "You saw nothing. Speak of it again, and there will be consequences." It wasn't a threat yelled in anger. It was cold, controlled, final. Elias nodded, his stomach tight, and never brought it up again. But he remembered. School life wasn't any more normal. He attended an elite private academy tucked away in the hills of New England, where most of his classmates were heirs to oil fortunes, political dynasties, and old European bloodlines. They formed tight cliques bound by shared nannies, family names whispered in headlines, and subtle signals that Elias was expected to understand, but never quite did. Sometimes he'd hear them joke in low tones. "Our parents basically run the world." They'd laugh, but there was truth under the surface. Despite the friendships he tried to form, Elias always felt like he was on the outside looking in. The teachers treated him differently, not just with respect, but with fear. Assignments he turned in late still earned praise. When he got in trouble, it vanished with a single call home. The headmaster once apologized for inconveniencing young Mr. Vance, after Elias skipped a final. By 15, the cracks in the illusion were too deep to ignore. That year, a grand masquerade ball was held at the estate. The mansion buzzed with staff, shipments of foreign wine, and strings of luxury cars arriving in the night. Elias watched the guests from the balcony above the ballroom. Each wore a mask, gold-trimmed falcons, owls, serpents, animals that seemed symbolic, but of what, he didn't yet know. At midnight, a bell rang. The music stopped. The guests, without instruction, began to move, slowly, precisely, toward the great hall. Elias followed, careful to stay hidden in the shadows above. Below, they formed a perfect circle around a stone platform in the center of the room. His father stepped onto it, dressed in ceremonial black, his arms raised. He spoke in Latin, voice echoing through the marble chamber. Traditio perpetua, custodium sanguinis. Tradition, continuity, the bloodline. Then, as one, the guests repeated a vow. Servad perpetual morin. Serve the perpetual order. Elias felt his skin prickle. This wasn't a party. It was something older, deeper. A ceremony older than the building they stood in. Later that night, Victor called Elias into the study. The fire was low. A glass of aged scotch swirled in his father's hand. "You've seen enough to start understanding," Victor said without preamble. "We're not just wealthy, Elias. We are caretakers of balance in a chaotic world. Our investments guide the rise and fall of nations." Elias felt nauseous. "But how? Why? Who are they?" Victor didn't flinch. "People who matter. People who shape the course of history. One day, you'll stand among them." Every answer felt like another war, closing in. The more Elias learned, the less it felt like a privilege and more like a prison. The network wasn't about philanthropy or legacy. It was about control. It had always been about control. And every time he questioned it, Victor waved him off with the same dismissive tone. "You're still young. The world will make more sense once you accept the illusions are necessary. The people, we give them freedom, a version of it they can live with." At 18, Elias's official induction into adulthood came with a gala so extravagant it felt obscene. The ballroom brimmed with powerful figures, foreign diplomats, CEOs of billion-dollar firms, dignitaries from families he'd only read about in encrypted archives. They addressed him as young master, presented gifts shrouded in symbolism, a silver ring etched with runes he didn't recognize, a leather-bound book filled with encrypted codes, and a scepter-like rod said to be an artifact of the old realm. He didn't feel honored. He felt buried beneath expectation. Later that night, after the last toast and the final handshake, Victor called Elias into the old library. The moonlight streamed through stained glass, casting strange patterns across the stone floor. On the oak table lay a thick, time-worn tome bound in dark leather, one word embossed across its front, bloodline. Victor motioned for him to open it. Elias turned the pages slowly. Each one was filled with family trees, maps of clandestine meetings and annotations next to events he recognized from history books. Wars, coups, financial collapses. Except here, they were marked with footnotes, ledgers, and orders, proof that someone had orchestrated it all. "Every Vance has read this," Victor said softly, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "It's time you understood your place. We don't seek power for its own sake. We guard humanity from itself." Elias didn't speak. He couldn't. The words felt too heavy in his throat, because deep down, he wasn't sure he believed it. And even deeper still, he was starting to wonder if he wanted to tear it all down. "This is the truth, Elias. The world doesn't work the way most people think. It's run by illusions, carefully crafted ones. And our family, we help maintain them." Victor's voice was low but steady, echoing off the stone walls of the library like an oath. The dim amber light from the sconces cast long shadows on the centuries-old paintings, each face seeming to lean in, listening. It's not just a burden, Victor continued. It's a privilege, but it comes with a price. If you ever betray what I'm about to share with you, you won't just be betraying me. You'll be turning your back on generations of our bloodline. Everything we are. Elias stood motionless, staring at the swirling script projected on the antique table in front of him. A digital text, encrypted in old codes he'd only ever seen glimpses of as a child. Back then, he thought they were just stories, weird hallucinations or family lore whispered when adults thought he wasn't listening. But now, those fragments had sharpened into terrifying clarity. These weren't fairy tales. These illusions were real. They steered governments, sculpted economies, buried truths, and pulled the strings of innovation itself. His mouth went dry. How many people have suffered because of these illusions? He asked quietly, almost to himself. Victor didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence inside the vast library was suffocating. Shelves loomed like watchmen, filled with forbidden knowledge. The old marble busts of past ancestors looked down with carved expressions of cold expectation. Elias could almost feel them judging him. He let out a slow breath and gave a small nod, more for Victor than himself. But inside, something shifted. A seed of doubt lodged itself deep. Can one family, even one global group, truly claim the right to shape the fate of billions? Even if they say it's for the sake of stability, who decides what's stable? Who decides what's right? That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He lay in his silk-sheeted bed, eyes open, staring into the darkness. The ceiling above seemed to close in, like a lid on a coffin. He had agreed, hadn't he? Without speaking the words, he had taken on the role. Caretaker of illusion. But the weight of it settled like lead on his chest. His mind spun with questions he couldn't ask, voices he couldn't silence. Somewhere between waking and sleep, he dreamed. Dark rooms filled with men in suits, their faces blurred, their hands tugging at invisible strings connected to presidents and markets. News anchors recited lines from scripts handed down by unseen editors. A child in a slum stared into a broken TV that flashed lies dressed as hope. And in that swirling chaos, Elias heard himself think, I need to know more. I have to see how deep this really goes before I decide who I want to be. The years that followed moved like clockwork gears, precise, controlled. By 25, Elias had transformed from curious heir to a rising star within Vance Global Holdings. On the surface, he was a business prodigy, a visionary with charm, intellect, and an uncanny knack for seeing the future. But behind closed doors, he was being shaped. His father oversaw his progress like a sculptor. He was taught how to speak with just enough truth to earn trust, how to smile without revealing motive, how to form alliances that could collapse empires. At university, professors bent over backward to accommodate him. Private seminars, tailored projects, unchecked influence. But the real education happened off campus. Private instructors drilled him in infiltration techniques, crisis manipulation, disinformation, and the psychological fault lines that could shatter men. He learned how to destabilize a market with a whisper, how to guide public opinion like a herd of cattle, how to turn noble causes into cautionary tales. Still, every time Elias closed a deal or executed an order from the circle, the shadowy council behind everything, he felt something twist inside him. The assignments were precise, surgical. One day, he was manipulating telecom interests in Eastern Europe, ensuring full data surveillance. Another, he oversaw media consolidations that shifted entire nations' narratives. He never failed. But the victories tasted more bitter than sweet. Then came the mission that broke something. A philanthropic foundation had developed a revolutionary form of renewable energy. Cheap, clean, powerful. Its creators dreamed of lifting entire nations out of energy poverty. But the circle saw it as a threat, not to humanity, to balance, destabilizing. they called it. Dangerous to the current structure. Elias knew what they meant. Dangerous to control. He tried to argue, but the circle was absolute. Their instructions came cold and final. Smear the foundation. Launch lawsuits. Discredit the scientists. Shut it down. And Elias did. Efficiently. Over the following weeks, the Foundation's labs were raided under trumped-up charges. Investors fled. Their lead scientist, once a Nobel hopeful, was labeled unstable. By the end of the month, the project was dead. Elias watched bright-eyed engineers become corporate pariahs. Watched their dream, once so full of light, snuffed out by a flick of his hand. He felt sick. That night, he found himself pacing the lower levels of the mansion. He ended up in a sealed section of the estate, one Victor had always told him to avoid. There, behind thick iron doors, he discovered a digital archive, global project summaries. It read innocently. Curiosity overtook fear. Inside were hundreds of files, some decades old, others centuries, passwords cracked under his fingers like brittle bones. Wars orchestrated for resource gain. Cures suppressed to prolong pharmaceutical profits. Elections nudged just enough to change outcomes. Entire financial bubbles inflated and detonated on command. There were even older documents, secret treaties, alliances among royal bloodlines, journals written in cipher by men who believed they were guardians of human destiny. Elias scrolled for hours. The sheer scale of it made him nauseous. Every tragedy he'd seen on the news, every inexplicable failure, every moment when hope had seemed just within reach before falling apart, it might have roots here, in these walls. It wasn't just Victor. It wasn't just the circle. It was history, and it was built on control. As Elias stared into the glowing screen, the silence around him grew heavier. The illusions weren't just part of the world, they were the world. And now he had to choose whether to protect them or destroy them. This machine, it wasn't just a system. It was a multi-generational engine powered by ego, the kind that says we know best, so we get to decide for everyone else. Over the next several months, Elias played the part. Loyal son, faithful heir, dutiful operator. But beneath that facade, he was copying everything. Thousands of files quietly transferred to encrypted drives he stashed behind false walls and under floorboards. He knew the documents alone weren't enough. He needed someone who could verify them. Someone trusted by the public, but too stubborn to be bought. That's when he found Ava Monroe. She was a sharp-edged investigative journalist, known for chasing conspiracies that mainstream media mocked. While most dismissed her, Elias read her work carefully. She wasn't crazy. She was early. She'd been circling the truth for years, digging into shadowy power brokers and strange political shifts no one could explain. He reached out using a burner identity, sending anonymous emails with tiny pieces of proof. A diplomatic cable that contradicted public statements. A politician's speech draft rewritten overnight after a private consultation. At first, Ava was cautious. "I've heard this kind of thing before," she said in a scrambled voicemail. "But this is different. Too clean. Too precise." The data kept coming. Little by little, Elias earned her trust. They set up a secure channel, encrypted keys, rotating proxies, obscure ciphers. Elias would drop fragments. Ava would cross-reference them with her own sources. Together they built a mosaic. Eventually she whispered into a voice message, her tone shaking. "This is real. I've never seen anything this damning." While their secret collaboration grew stronger, the Circle gave Elias his next assignment, a quiet adjustment of power in a resource-rich African country. The target, a democratically elected president who had refused a Western energy deal. The Circle's plan was simple: manipulate the nation's currency supply, crash its economy, stir civil unrest, and install a puppet regime more cooperative with oil interests. Elias's stomach turned. He saw it for what it was. Another illusion to preserve order. Another body count. The worst part came during a lunch meeting with a circle elder, a smug man who spoke like he was recounting sports scores. Oh, that little coup back in the 90s. The man chuckled. A masterpiece. We handed them democracy and pulled the rug out before they even stood up. Chaos is the best compliance tool. Elias didn't respond. He just sipped his wine and looked away. That's it, he thought. I'm done pretending. He contacted Ava again, this time with full honesty. No pseudonym, no aliases. He still wouldn't meet her in person, but the barrier between them was gone. I'm going to expose everything, he typed. Not just hints, the whole machine. I have the archives, decades of it, every file, every lie, every hidden hand, Ava warned him. They'll come for you, you know that, right? They don't just erase evidence, they erase people. I know, Elias replied. But if I don't do this, I'll be one of them forever, and I can't live with that. As the day of his formal induction into the Circle's inner council approached, a private ceremony that marked his full inheritance, Elias kept up appearances. Suit pressed, smile ready, obedient son. Behind the scenes, Ava was building a team of trusted journalists, hackers, and whistleblowers. They planned a coordinated data drop, encrypted files mirrored across servers worldwide. At the center of it all would be Elias's video confession. His face, his voice, his truth. The risk was astronomical. The Circle had surveillance networks embedded in nearly every tech infrastructure. But Elias believed in something stronger, the raw, uncontrollable power of truth, once it was seen. At the pre-ceremony dinner, Victor Vance raised a glass. To my son, he said, his voice thick with pride. You've made me proud, Elias. Soon, you'll help shape the future. You'll have a seat at the table with the elders. Elias lifted his glass and smiled, but his palms were sweating under the table. He looked around the candlelit room, at the men and women who had orchestrated wars, sabotaged revolutions, suppressed hope. He pictured the starving children, the inventors silenced before their work could bloom, the hidden cures that could have saved millions. He realized then, this wasn't betrayal, it was freedom. That night, in his private suite, Elias sat before a camera. No suit, no performance. My name is Elias Vance, he began. His voice shook but grew steadier. I was born into a family that sits at the center of a global network of control. For generations, we've manipulated history from behind the curtain. I no longer believe in our cause. He detailed the rigged economies, the artificial conflicts, the ways they controlled elections and suppressed breakthroughs. He named names. He cited evidence. He told the world exactly how the illusions worked and who paid the price. When he finished, his hands trembled. His phone buzzed, a message from Ava. We're ready. One word from you, and it all goes live. He typed back. Tomorrow, after the gathering, once I send the final file, there's no turning back. He stood and walked to the window. The city lights blinked below like stars trapped in glass. A quiet calm settled over him. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of purpose. For the first time in his life, Elias Vance wasn't part of the illusion. He was the beginning of its end. He couldn't stop thinking about the ceremonies, the ones they never talked about, the ones whispered about in dusty halls and behind locked doors. The quiet that hung in those moments felt like it was creeping into him now, as if death itself were drawing close. Was this the final hush? The one that comes after your last breath, shook the thought off like cold water. This wasn't the time. He had a job to do. Let them come. He muttered to the empty room. I'll step into the light, no matter what it costs. The day of the Circle's gathering arrived with an unsettling kind of grandeur. It was more than a meeting. It felt like a performance. Held deep in the countryside at a secluded estate cloaked in rumor and myth, the place was said to have once housed Templar knights. Now it was dressed up in modern secrecy and old-world power. Elias rode with his father in a sleek black car, part of a silent convoy snaking down private roads. No one spoke much. At the estate gates, attendees were politely but firmly told to surrender their phones and cameras. Elias complied like everyone else, but he'd come prepared. Beneath the cuff of his suit, he wore an elegant watch, sleek, expensive looking. No one would question it, but inside, hidden behind the polished face, was a micro SD card and a discreet data transmitter. That watch held everything. The archive, the evidence, the proof. All he had to do was activate it when no one was looking. The closer they got, the tighter the pressure felt in his chest. They arrived at twilight. The sky was bruised purple, and torchlight flickered across the grounds, making the topiary look like crouched figures. The estate itself was massive, its stone walls worn by time but still grand. Inside, the halls were lined with dark wood and portraits of unsmiling ancestors. They walked through long corridors until they entered a domed hall painted with swirling figures. Gods, demons, angels, locked in an endless cosmic war. Elias's footsteps echoed as he followed his father, who looked almost giddy. "Tonight," Victor said in a hushed but intense voice, "you prove your loyalty to the bloodline. No second thoughts, I hope." Elias nodded with what calm he could muster. "I'm ready." But his hands were cold. His heart was hammering. He scanned the room. Men in custom-tailored suits, women in flowing gowns, each of them exuding control. These weren't just elites. They were something darker. Whispers floated around him. Economic shifts, political maneuvering, asset takeovers. The language was calm, polished, and terrifying. At the center of the room was a raised circular dais where the elders sat, his father among them. When everyone took their places, the ceremony began. The High Elder stepped forward, his voice gravelly, with age and power, and recited the invocation. It was old, older than most languages. It spoke of guardianship, of shaping destiny, of protecting a hidden design passed down through blood. Then came Elias's moment. He stepped forward on unsteady legs, trying to steady his breathing. The High Elder took his hand and slid a ring onto his finger, cold, silver, and etched with a triangle made of iron lines. A ripple of polite applause followed. Cold, controlled, final. Elias bowed. He looked every bit the loyal son, but inside he was already pulling the trigger. As the rituals faded into informal conversations, attendees moved to small clusters, sipping aged wines and casually discussing global trends as if they were talking about the weather. Elias politely excused himself, saying he needed space to reflect. No one questioned it. In the estate's library, he closed the heavy door behind him. The room smelled like leather and dust. Books loomed around him like silent sentries. With shaky fingers, he tapped the watch face. Once, twice, 3 times. A tiny green light blinked beneath the surface. His chest tightened. It was done. The upload had started. Everything on the micro, SD card, documents, recordings, video evidence, was now being sent to encrypted global servers. At the same time, a separate link was transmitting to Ava Monroe. She was standing by, ready to spread it across every decentralized platform they'd planned for. His mouth went dry. His mind raced. This was it. No way back. He pictured the elders' expressions when they realized what had happened. Imagined their fury, their panic. More than that, he imagined regular people, finally seeing what lay beneath the polished surface of the world. He prayed it wouldn't just cause chaos, that it would open eyes. Then he heard footsteps. Quiet, steady. He turned, heart slamming into his ribs. Victor Vance stood in the doorway, arms crossed, calm, unreadable. "Son," he said, softly, "you seem uneasy." Elias swallowed hard. "I'm fine, just the ceremony. It was a lot." Victor stepped closer, his eyes narrowing just slightly. "This wasn't just a ritual, Elias. This was your induction into something larger than yourself. It's about loyalty, about trust. A pause. The air thickened. I sense hesitation, he said, voice low. Is there something I should know? The question wasn't casual. It wasn't even curious. It was surgical, and it was a test. Elias steadied himself, willing the tremor out of his voice. I'm loyal to the legacy, he said quietly. As I'm expected to be. Victor's eyes didn't soften. In fact, they hardened. Don't give me rehearsed lines, he said. You need to be honest with me. The council monitors every signal in and out of this estate. We have surveillance layered across every channel. He took a step closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. There was a disturbance in the data stream just moments ago. A cold ripple ran down Elias's spine. He forced a casual shrug. Could be routine interference, the estate's jammers. They're not exactly flawless. Might have just glitched. Victor didn't answer, just stared at him, calculating, weighing the lie. Then, he turned briskly toward the corridor. Come, we should rejoin the others. If there is a problem, we'll find out soon enough. The words sounded benign, but the meaning was sharp and unmistakable. If something's wrong, we'll know. It's you. Elias followed, pulse thudding in his ears, sweat slicking his palms. The grand hall buzzed with low conversation, too quiet to be casual. People stood in tight groups, murmuring with an edge of tension. No panic. Yet. Maybe the data was still moving through the net. Maybe the full hit hadn't landed. He had to keep it together. 30 minutes passed like a slow suffocation. Then, a senior council member, an oil tycoon Elias recognized, answered a phone call he shouldn't have had in the first place. His face darkened. He turned and whispered urgently to one of the elders. The ripple was instant. People began checking, their watches, some slipping out discreet devices. Others whispered names, terms, fears. One phrase floated through the crowd. Major breach. Coordinated release. Vance family involved. The knot in Elias's stomach twisted tighter. They know. The High Elder raised his voice, calm but forceful. We must remain composed. The source will be found, immediately. Silence fell, heavier than any ritual. Eyes swept the hall. Quiet suspicion bloomed. A collective scanning of faces, postures, guilt. Elias held still, struggling to mask the pounding in his chest. Then his eyes locked with his father's. Victor wasn't confused anymore. He wasn't guessing. He knew, a flicker of something raw passed over his face. Pain, disbelief, rage. He stepped forward and grabbed Elias's wrist with surprising force. His voice stayed low, but it carried razor-sharp urgency. "What have you done?" he hissed. Elias didn't flinch. His voice wavered, but the words held firm. What had to be done? The world deserves the truth. Victor's face contorted, disbelief morphing into fury. "You fool! You've destroyed everything we've built, everything your ancestors bled for. Gone in a moment." Elias yanked free. The room was spiraling now. Elders shouting into private comms, younger members frantically checking encrypted networks, some already calling it a cyber attack, others claiming sabotage. Media outlets were reacting, too fast, some already issuing denials. They were ready for this, Elias realized. The circle had contingency plans. Still, he'd struck first. Time to run. He spun and bolted. Someone shouted his name, but he didn't stop. He pushed through the crowd, brushing past stunned faces. A security guard moved to intercept, but Elias ducked under his arm and sprinted through the corridor. Chaos chased him. "Stop him!" Voice barked behind. He crashed through the front doors, lungs burning. The torchlit courtyard blurred around him. Then he saw it. A black staff car, engine idling, the driver distracted by the unfolding commotion. "Please," Elias lunged in, slammed the door shut, shifted into gear, and tore off down the gravel drive, tires spitting stones into the dark. In the rearview mirror, figures spilled out of the estate, some shouting, some frozen in shock, none quite knowing what to do. They'd never expected betrayal from within. The trees swallowed the estate behind him, and still, Elias's hands shook. He'd done it. The files were out. The truth was out, but he wasn't safe, not even close. The circle didn't just have influence, they had reach, global, military, political. They could erase people like a line of code. Still, if Ava got the files out wide enough, viral enough, it wouldn't matter. The truth would have a life of its own. He gripped the wheel tighter, swerving off the main road, cutting through forested back roads with the headlights off, adrenaline screaming through every nerve. He tried to call Ava. Static, dead signal. Maybe they were already jamming communications. Maybe she was on the move too. The only thing he could do now was keep moving. He drove through the night, stopping only to ditch the car and switch to a hidden dirt bike he'd stashed weeks ago, just in case. That first week was a blur of cold motel rooms, abandoned cabins, whispered passwords to trusted allies. Most of his contacts went silent, probably compromised, threatened, bought. Only Ava remained, a ghost on the edge of the web, dropping burner messages, dead drops, encrypted files. Their communication was fragile, but it was something. He lived in shadows now. They were calling him a traitor, a terrorist, a mentally unstable heir gone rogue. They were flooding the media with disinformation, trying to bury the leak in noise and confusion. But every now and then, he caught glimpses of truth breaking through. A protest, a leaked clip, people asking questions. Late one night, crouched in a freezing basement in some nameless town, Elias stared at a laptop screen, watching the files being mirrored again, picked up by activists, journalists, whistleblower, forums. He smiled for the first time in days. It was working. But as he stared at the glow, a darker thought crept in. The circle won't stop. They'll come. They always do. He reached into his coat, felt the cold weight of the pistol he'd picked up along the way. If they came for him, he wouldn't go, quietly. Not now. Not after all this. She confirmed the data was definitely out there, but the mainstream news was calling it a hoax, a carefully crafted lie. Meanwhile, some government insiders were quietly digging, trying to get to the bottom of it. The leak was real, but the inner circle was scrambling to cover it up, patching every crack before it could spread. Online, rumors exploded like wildfire. Some people swore they'd seen the leaked files, grainy screenshots with documents tying the Vance name to secret war funding. Others insisted it was just deep-fake hysteria, a smear campaign. Troll armies flooded forums, calling Elias a disgruntled outcast, a conspiracy nut. The circle's spin machine kicked into overdrive, twisting every story to its advantage. The public was caught in a storm of confusion, unable to tell truth from lies. Late one night, during a quiet, tense phone call, Ava told Elias she'd narrowly escaped an attempt on her life. A suspicious car crash she'd somehow avoided by seconds. She didn't think it was random. "They're cleaning house," she whispered. "Don't trust anyone." Elias swallowed hard, feeling the weight settle deep inside. The circle would come for him next. He steeled himself, determined to meet Ava face to face soon. Somewhere offline, away from the endless digital eyes watching their every move. They needed a plan for the next wave of leaks. Something stronger, smarter. But the circle seemed one step ahead. Just past midnight, a cryptic text buzzed in from an unknown number. "Escape route secured. Plane to Iceland. You'll be safe." Elias frowned. Why would someone suddenly offer him a flight out? Was it a trap? Still, within the hour, Ava sent word she had booked a flight to Iceland too. Was it coincidence? Or was someone trying to lure them both into a trap? Time was running out, and he had no choice but to take the risk. Iceland was rumored to be a safe haven for data activists, far from the circle's reach. He arrived at a private airstrip under the cover of darkness. A lone pilot, calm but alert, waited and greeted him by name. No sign of Ava yet, but she'd told him she'd join him later. The jet was sleek and unmarked, almost too perfect. Maybe she'd meet him at their destination. Elias climbed aboard cautiously, eyes scanning every inch of the cabin for hidden dangers. If this was a setup, being trapped miles above ground left him vulnerable. The engines hummed to life, the pilot responding with short, clipped words. The plane lifted smoothly, the city's glow fading beneath them. Elias tried to steady his nerves. Once in Iceland, he could rally support, push the files to the world, finally break free from the circle's chokehold. He glanced at his phone. No signal, just like Ava said. He tapped out a message in offline mode. "If we get separated, keep fighting. I'll find you." A heavy pit settled in his stomach. Something about the night felt final, like stepping off a cliff into the unknown. About an hour into the flight, turbulence rattled the cabin. Elias tightened his seatbelt. A calm voice came over the intercom. "Mild weather front ahead. Shouldn't be a problem." But the shaking worsened. Then, a sharp beep from the cockpit made his blood run cold. He stood, heading forward. The pilot looked grim, fingers moving rapidly over controls. "We're losing instrumentation," he muttered. Could be a glitch or sabotage. Sabotage. At 20,000 feet, that meant death. Outside the window, lightning cracked through thick, roiling clouds. The plane rocked violently. "We need to land," Elias said, voice tense. The pilot nodded, hitting the radio to send a mayday. Static was the only answer. "Radio's cut out," he said. "Looks like they're jamming us." Another violent shudder shook the fuselage. Alarms blared. The pilot struggled to steady the aircraft, but it veered sharply to starboard, losing control. Elias's mind raced. This was the circle's final move. Make it look like a tragic accident. Erase the last loose end. He almost saw Victor Vance's cold face in his mind, sneering, "No traitor shall live." The pilot cursed, sweat beading on his forehead. "We're going down! I can't get the systems back online." Elias grabbed the emergency radio, shouting Mayday on every frequency. Silence. Then a faint, crackling voice responded, a distant air traffic controller, but it cut out suddenly, jammed again. The plane pitched downward, engines whining in protest. Time slowed. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. He braced himself, tightening every strap. The cabin lights flickered wildly. The altimeter spun uncontrollably. Even if he survived this, he thought, the circle would find a way to finish the job. But there was no time to think about that now. The pilot's voice cracked through the chaos, shouting, "Grace! Grace! Grace!" Then everything exploded into a nightmare of screaming metal and crashing impact. Elias was thrown violently, his body slammed against the seatbelt that bit into his chest as the plane twisted and broke apart. A searing, sharp pain tore through him, followed by the overwhelming rush of darkness swallowing everything. For a moment, his mind barely grasped the sensation of the plane breaking apart, plunging into what felt like icy water. The cold flooded, the cabin in a shock that stole his breath away. Time seemed to slow, the noise cutting out into a bizarre, eerie silence. He thought, "Am I alive?" His lungs burned fiercely as he drifted in the cold, dark oblivion, but something inside refused to give up. Groping blindly, he found a jagged hole in the fuselage and forced himself out. Even as the sharp edges tore into his skin, salt water stung his eyes, mixing with the flicker of a lone emergency beacon flashing somewhere nearby, before everything slipped into blackness again. Hours later, or maybe it was minutes or days, Elias awoke on a fragment of wreckage, tossed by relentless ocean waves. The plane was gone, vanished beneath the dark waters. The pilot was nowhere to be seen. Overhead, the night sky stretched vast and indifferent, stars swirling silently. Every nerve in his body screamed in pain, a coughing fit tearing from deep within his chest. He was alive. Somehow, against all odds, he was still alive. But for how long? Clinging to consciousness, a mantra ran through his mind. Don't let them win. Don't let them bury the truth. Then a faint sound, someone or something approaching. His mind blurred, caught somewhere between reality and a dream. He remembered Ava's words about decoy plans, about altering flight manifests to confuse their enemies. Could she have arranged something? His memory flickered and faded like fragile smoke. When he stirred again, the first light of dawn glinted on the endless waves. No sign of rescue. This is it, he thought, the last reserves of strength draining away. Summoning all he had left, Elias recited the conspiracies he had uncovered. Even if he died here, the data was out. Someone, somewhere, would keep it alive, and Ava, she had to survive. She had to carry it on. Then darkness claimed him once more. In the days that followed, the official news cycle reported the crash of a private jet. Business class, Elias Vance presumed dead. The story was brief, clinical. Mechanical failure, the experts said. Investigations closed quickly, quietly. But in shadowy corners of the internet, whispers grew louder. Was it sabotage? Some speculated fiercely, while the Vance family issued carefully worded statements of sorrow, but never mentioned conspiracies. The tragedy faded from headlines, pushed aside by fresh celebrity scandals, political battles, and financial upheaval. No remains were ever found, but a funeral was held. A solemn affair attended by the global elite, all stiff smiles and polite condolences. Victor Vance stood unmoved in front of cameras, offering only a cold, measured statement. We honor my son's memory. Yet beneath the polished surface, the war raged on. Fragments of the Vance files leaked here and there, though the circle poured resources into burying them. Websites hosting the data vanished overnight. Domain registrations revoked without explanation. Social media flagged the leaks as fake. And a flood of experts claimed the documents were AI-generated fabrications, a twisted conspiratorial irony. The public was left confused, locked in endless debates, never quite certain where the truth lay. Ava Monroe lived on the edge of that storm. She had survived because she never got on that plane, the suspect flight that had almost been a trap. Instead, she and Elias had crafted a fallback plan. If he disappeared, she would become the guardian of what remained. A flicker of hope lingered, that he might still be alive. But as the weeks dragged into months, that hope dimmed. She worked relentlessly, day and night, hammering away at her keyboard, finding new discreet ways to leak what she could, publishing carefully on obscure platforms, encouraging small investigative reporters to follow the trail. But every time a thread gained traction, the circle's countermeasures snapped it shut. Then one day, an unmarked package arrived at her secret hideout. Inside was a battered watch, Elias's watch, the same device that had transmitted the trove of data. A note accompanied it. He tried. Now it's your turn. No signature, no clue who sent it. Maybe a fisherman found it. Maybe Elias had thrown it into the sea himself. Ava's chest tightened. She slipped the watch onto her wrist, silently swearing never to let the story die. Outside, the world had grown cynical. The initial shock of the leaks faded into weariness, disbelief. The truth buried beneath layers of denial and distraction, but Ava knew better. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. People had been buried under an avalanche of conspiracies and digital smokescreens for so long that the truth felt more like a fading rumor than something you could actually grasp. Some believed with everything they had, forming small protest groups and spray painting Elias lives on alley walls like holy scripture. Others rolled their eyes and scrolled past it all, chalking it up as just another internet hoax. Most people just felt numb. Even if the Illuminati or whatever shadowy group was real, what could a regular person possibly do? Behind closed doors, the circle, the secretive elite, kept moving like they always had. Rituals older than memory, deals sealed in hushed voices, levers of power pulled without resistance. Their media branches twisted the truth expertly, burying the scandal under layers of spin and distraction. News anchors talked of combating misinformation, while politicians quietly passed laws that made it easier to silence real whistleblowers. Victor Vance remained publicly composed, a mogul, a leader, untouchable. But behind the curtain, he was breaking. His son's betrayal burned in his memory like a cigarette pressed into flesh. Elias had not only defied him, he had exposed him. Still, amid the fury, there was grief. Elias had been his heir, his blood. Control had always mattered more to Victor than love, but now that control felt hollow. Yet Elias's memory wouldn't die. Not really. Beneath the media fog and curated headlines, a few small groups stayed focused. Offline meetups started happening in basements and parking garages. They passed around copies of the Vance files. Thousands of pages Elias had leaked. People huddled over printouts and USB drives, matching data to real-world events, assassinations, regime changes, missing technologies, and the coincidences lined up too precisely to ignore. Doubt spread, slow but steady. Elias Vance became more than a name. He became a question people couldn't unask. One rainy night, in a forgotten alley of a far-off city, an artist painted a mural on a graffiti-covered wall. It was Elias. His hand, stretched outward, holding a flickering candle flame. Underneath, in dripping white paint, he exposed the light. Photos of the mural made a brief ripple online, swallowed quickly by viral dances and cat videos. But a few paused. They stared. They remembered the rumors. The rich kid who blew the whistle on his own family, who tried to burn the system down from the inside. Maybe it was all fake, maybe not. But something about that mural stuck with people. Ava Monroe wasn't the type to give speeches or make noise, but behind the scenes, she moved like a scalpel. A former analyst, she made quiet contact with a growing network of independent journalists. She fed them carefully curated fragments of the files, partnered with cryptographers, rogue academics, even a few disillusioned intelligence officers. Together, they began piecing together something undeniable. Over time, a larger picture began to form, impossible to ignore, even harder to disprove. In university forums and encrypted message boards, debates stirred. Historians hesitated, then tiptoed into the conversation. Could world events really have been manipulated by a secret elite? A few brave ones spoke the Vance name aloud. The idea spread, not like wildfire, but like mold in the dark, quiet and steady. No revolutions broke out, not immediately, but cracks appeared. Governments felt the pressure and scrambled to dismiss the chatter. Official statements were released, dismissive, sterile. The circle retaliated with more polished propaganda, drowning out the voices that tried to speak. People sensed the tension, though they couldn't always say what it was. A hum beneath the surface, a feeling that the stage show of politics was hiding something older, darker. Elias's name became almost ghostly, spoken in hushed tones, shared in anonymous posts. Some called him a naive idealist, others a true hero. To Ava, he was something more. In a small, unremarkable home on a forgotten stretch of coast, she hid a hard drive labeled Eve Legacy. It held everything, the full, unredacted confession Elias had recorded before vanishing. She'd watched it too many times. The raw truth in his voice, the conflict, the sadness. She wrote a note and tucked it inside the drive's case. If you're reading this, you hold the future in your hands. He died so we could see what hides in the dark. Don't waste it. Sometimes she would scroll through old messages he'd sent her, jokes, questions, the occasional spark of doubt. And sometimes she'd read the long message he sent the night, before he disappeared. The one where he said he didn't know if this would change anything. But he had to try. He couldn't stay silent anymore. She wondered, often, if in another version of the world, he had survived. Maybe they exposed it, or maybe people listened, but real life doesn't tie itself up neatly. The struggle continued, messy and full of grey. Ava kept working, because once you've seen what's behind the curtain, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to pretending. Elias had stared into centuries of shadows and chosen to strike a match. They crushed his body, but they couldn't kill what he ignited. The Illuminati, if that's even what they are, remained vast and deeply rooted. But something shifted. A few more people started asking the right questions, started reading between the headlines. The quiet in the halls of power trembled. Not much, but enough to notice. That's the story of Elias Vance, a boy born into silence who chose to speak, a boy who inherited a legacy meant to bury the world in shadows and lit a flame instead. Yet, he chose to speak. And in that single act, he gave the world a glimpse behind the curtain, revealing the grand illusions shaping their lives. His name, Elias Vance, lived on, not in textbooks or headlines, but in encrypted forums, whispered late-night conversations, rebellious murals under freeway bridges, and in the quiet, haunted reflections of those who had begun to suspect that the world wasn't what it seemed. Maybe in time those illusions would crumble, but until then, his name stood like a flickering candle in the dark, a symbol of the price of truth, and of the quiet resilience of those brave enough to chase it. Some say Elias leaked classified information that was never meant to see the light of day. Tonight, we go deeper into the cold, forgotten corners of government experiments and the barely there veil that separates our reality from something far stranger. Daniel Cross jolted upright in bed, his breath ragged, his skin soaked in sweat. The sheets wrapped around his legs like they were trying to hold him down. That dream again. Worse this time. The underground tunnels were clearer. Cold, metallic corridors pulsing with a dim blue light. The sound of boots on concrete. And always that chair, bolted to the floor, straps digging into his wrists. A voice, emotionless, clinical, echoing from some unseen speaker. Subject 17 shows heightened response. Neural amplitude increased by 30%. Daniel shivered. He was alone, or so he thought. His bedroom TV flickered on, static. He stared. He knew he'd turned it off. The screen hissed with grey snow, but beneath the chaos of pixels, he heard it. That low hum, just barely within the range of human hearing. Not loud, but insistent. Almost like a tuning fork vibrating in his brain. It tugged at something deep inside him, like a memory trying to claw its way out. He stood, his legs trembling as he shuffled toward the screen. His eyes locked onto the noise. Shapes began to emerge in the static. At first, he thought, they were random, but then they began to form lines, angles, geometries that felt wrong, like they shouldn't exist. His reflection stared back from the screen, but something about it was off. The eyes. They weren't quite his. Delta Protocol 17, Daniel whispered. He didn't know why he said it. The words just came, like they were always there, waiting. Initiate phase bend. The static flared. The pitch of the hum spiked into a sharp whine that drilled into his skull. His teeth ached. His fillings throbbed like metal trying to escape. Bone. And then, blackness. The screen went dead. Daniel stood in silence, breathing hard. His hands were shaking, and before he even realized it, tears were spilling down his cheeks. The next morning, he told himself it was just a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and bad sleep, nothing more. But as he brushed his teeth, he saw it, a mark, just behind his left ear, small, circular, faintly red. It looked like a healed injection site. He ran a fingertip over it, trying to remember a doctor's visit, an injury, anything. There was nothing. The days that followed blurred into a haze. The dreams returned again and again. Always the same cold facility. The white coats, the bright lights, the electrodes. In the dreams, he was a child, maybe 11 or 12. Strapped to that chair, wires running from his scalp, his arms, machines monitoring him, voices murmuring behind glass. The strange thing was, it didn't feel like a dream. There was always one constant in those visions, a radar tower in the distance, visible through a cracked window or across a barren field. It loomed against a stormy sky like a sentinel, massive, round cowling, steel and rust. Daniel began to draw it, first once, then over and over. He couldn't stop. Pages littered his apartment, sketches of the tower from different angles, the coastline beneath it, symbols, strange, twisting runes, appeared in the margins, as if his hand had a will of its own. At work, he started slipping. Late on assignments, distracted. His code was messy, unlike him. One afternoon in the cafeteria, his co-worker, Martin, sat down across from him. "You look like shit, Dan." Daniel offered a weak smile. "Haven't been sleeping." "What's going on?" He hesitated. "Weird dreams. Nightmares, I guess." "About what?" Daniel looked down at his coffee. Some kind of underground facility, tests, scientists, a chair, and a radar tower near the ocean. Martin's plastic fork froze halfway, to his mouth. "What kind of tower? I don't know. Cold War era, maybe. Big dish on top. I think it's called an FPS-35. The word surprised even Daniel. Where had that come from? Martin slowly set his fork down. "That's pretty specific. You sure it's just a dream?" "I know. That's what's freaking me out. There's more too." Daniel leaned in, lowering his voice. "Sometimes, when the TV gets static, I hear something, like a tone. It doesn't sound like words, more like a beacon, like it's calling me." Martin stared at him for a long moment. "You ever hear of Camp Hero?" Daniel blinked. "Where?" "Montauk. Out on Long Island. Old Air Force base. Decommissioned decades ago." Daniel felt a sudden chill crawl down his spine. That name, it felt like a switch being flipped in his brain. "Why?" he asked quietly. Martin hesitated, then said, "There's all sorts of stories about it. Secret projects, time experiments, kids being tested for psychic abilities. It's been in conspiracy circles for years. Montauk was supposedly the model for Stranger Things." Daniel said nothing, but inside, something clicked. The tower, the chair, the voices. He'd never been to Camp Hero, at least, not that he could remember. But a part of him, the part that whispered in dreams and drew symbols he didn't understand, seemed to know otherwise. His coffee cup slipped from suddenly numb fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor with a sharp crack. Porcelain shards scattered under the table, and a bloom of dark liquid spread across the tile like a slow-moving stain. "Jesus, you okay?" Martin asked, stepping back quickly to avoid the coffee. Daniel didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on something that wasn't there, something far away. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "I need to go there." Martin furrowed his brow. "Go where?" "Montauk," Daniel said, more to himself than to Martin. The name hung in the air like a distant echo. The drive to Long Island took 4 hours, but for Daniel, it passed in a strange fog. It didn't feel like a road trip. It felt like a return, as though he were retracing the steps of a long-forgotten exile. Crossing into the township of Montauk, he felt an odd pressure build behind his eyes. Not painful exactly, more like the moment before a sneeze, a tingling tension that refused release. The pines on either side of the narrowing road leaned in close, their trunks packed tight like silent watchers. Twice, his GPS lost signal, but he didn't need it. His hands turned the wheel without conscious thought. guiding him deeper into remote, cracked asphalt roads that wound like veins through the forest. And then the trees broke, giving way to scrubland and the vast, endless shimmer of the Atlantic. And there it was, exactly as he remembered drawing it as a child, over and over, the radar tower of Camp Hero, massive, looming, with its angular silhouette etched against the pale afternoon sky. The old Air Force base sprawled beneath it in squat concrete shapes, bunkers and decaying buildings built to withstand bombs that never came. At the entrance stood a rusted sign reading, Camp Hero State Park. The war was over. The military was long gone, but something wasn't right. The perimeter fence looked too new. The security cameras mounted on the poles didn't match the age of the rest of the place. They gleamed, maintained, watched. Daniel parked in the near-empty lot, the engine ticking as it cooled. A light wind carried the scent of ocean salt and pine resin. The visitor center was a faded military building painted in dull green, its sides flaking in long curls. Inside, a middle-aged park ranger looked up from her crossword puzzle without moving the rest of her body. "Closing in an hour," she said flatly. Daniel approached the counter, trying to steady his voice. "I was wondering what you could tell me about the history of this place." His heart thudded in his chest. She shrugged and pushed a folded pamphlet across the scratched surface. Cold War radar installation. Shut down in the early 70s. Self-guided tour maps are in there. Stick to the marked trails. Daniel hesitated, then asked quietly, "What about the underground sections?" The ranger's pencil froze mid-letter. Her eyes rose slowly to meet his, guarded now. "There aren't any underground sections open to the public," she said, her tone clipped. "But they exist, don't they?" The air in the room felt heavier. "Look, mister," she said, voice edging toward irritation. "It's just an old radar site. If you're one of those conspiracy guys..." "I've been here before," Daniel said, cutting her off. He hadn't planned to say it. It just came out. "That's not possible," she said immediately. "It was restricted military property until '92. Daniel leaned in, his palms on the counter. "What about the Montauk project?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The ranger's face tightened. Her hand moved deliberately toward the phone. "Park's closing early today." "I'm not here to cause trouble," Daniel said quickly. "Just a few questions. Either you leave now," she said, her finger hovering above the keypad, "or I call security." Daniel backed away slowly, his fingers closing around the pamphlet. He walked to his car without looking back, but as he pulled out of the lot, a black SUV turned in, government plates. The man in the passenger seat lifted a camera and snapped a photo of Daniel's license plate as they passed. He didn't leave. Instead, he turned toward the public beach that lay adjacent to the base. The sky was starting to bruise with the coming dusk. Daniel followed a weathered trail along the bluffs that overlooked the Atlantic, the sea churning below. The radar tower was always in view, like it was tracking him, swiveling in the mind, if not in the world. Eventually, he reached a chain link fence that marked the border of the base. He stood still, eyes scanning the metal. Part of him felt like he was seeing it for the first time, but deeper down, in the places of muscle memory and childhood dreams, he already knew it. Without thinking, he walked 20 yards to the left. There, a section of fence had been replaced. The metal looked newer, shinier. He hadn't measured it, hadn't planned it, but it was exactly where he knew it would be. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the scrub and cliffside. A narrow washout in the bluff caught his eye. A landslide at some point had carved a slanted path down to the beach below. He followed it. The beach was thin and jagged, more rock than sand. The base's seawall loomed ahead, a brutal length of concrete stained with rust and graffiti. Waves hissed and slapped at its base. Daniel moved slowly along it, brushing his hand over the rough wall. His fingers caught on something. A small recess, almost hidden by corrosion and shadow. Inside it, a rusted metal panel. An old electrical box. Without hesitation, he punched in a sequence of numbers. 8135. Nothing happened. The keypad stayed. Dark. The wall was silent. But something deep in Daniel's bones stirred. Something that told him he wasn't wrong. Just early. He tried again. First 8315, then, almost instinctively, 8153. A deep, mechanical groan rumbled from somewhere inside the wall, low and guttural like the sound of a great machine stirring after a long sleep. A slab of concrete, expertly, camouflaged to blend with the seawall, shifted inwards several inches with a heavy click. Daniel hesitated only a moment before stepping forward. He pushed the slab, and it swung open on hidden hinges, revealing a dark, narrow corridor descending into the earth. A cold, damp breath of air rushed out to greet him, thick with mildew, a faint electric tang of ozone, and something else, sharp, synthetic, chemical. The scent triggered something in Daniel's brain. A shiver crawled up his spine as déjà vu surged through him like static electricity. He turned on his phone's flashlight and stepped inside. The tunnel sloped down gently. The concrete walls soon gave way to roughly hewn stone, wet and glistening. The beam of light flickered over mineral veins and trickles of water that ran like tears down the walls. The silence was heavy, broken only by the quiet echo of his footsteps and the occasional drip of unseen water. Daniel didn't need to think about where to go. He moved by instinct, something buried deep inside him. Muscle memory or trauma guided his steps. About 50 yards in, the tunnel opened into a wider chamber. Rusted maintenance equipment lay in collapsed heaps. Old shelves had fallen into themselves like they'd given up long ago. Everything smelled of rot and dust and time. But Daniel knew this wasn't just some forgotten storage room. He swept his light across the far wall and stopped on a massive metal door, slightly ajar. The edges of the opening were blacker than shadow. His flashlight's beams struggled to pierce it, the light swallowed by a darkness that felt deliberate. He moved closer, heart hammering in his chest. As he neared the door, a sudden dizziness overcame him, nausea and disorientation rushing in like a wave. Then the memories hit, not one by one, but in a fractured torrent. Children in hospital gowns, scientists with cold eyes and clipboards. A metal chair surrounded by whirring machines and strange glowing coils. And always the tests. A voice, calm but insistent, echoed in his mind. Focus on the light, Daniel. Tell us what you see through the gateway. His phone slipped from his fingers and clattered against the floor. He didn't feel it leave his hand. His knees buckled, and he collapsed. As consciousness faded, he saw one last thing. Scratched crudely into the metal door, a triangle intersected by a perfect circle. Daniel awoke on the beach, the tide lapping at his feet. Stars glittered above him. The sky was ink black. The sun had long since set. His clothes were soaked through as if he'd been pulled from the ocean, but he had no memory of entering the water. No dream, no fall. Just the door. His phone was gone. He sat up slowly, shivering. The seawall stood solid and uninterrupted behind him. No seam, no hidden door. Just unbroken concrete, eroded and tagged with graffiti. The entrance was gone. Not shut, erased. Daniel checked his watch. 9:02 p.m., but the date was wrong. According to the display, he'd been missing for nearly 3 full days. The drive back to Connecticut blurred into a sequence of headlights and highway shadows. The night passed outside the car in a hypnotic, real. Daniel couldn't stop thinking, couldn't stop seeing. The fragments in his head were clearer now, too clear, like someone had cut into his memories and spliced in scenes from another life. But they felt realer than anything he remembered about his own childhood, or college, or his first real job. He remembered the chair, They had called it the Montauk chair, a monstrous tangle of metal and wires designed with parts salvaged from downed aircraft, some of it not human-made. Tesla coils buzzed and glowed around it. He remembered the feeling when they turned it on, the way his consciousness had been pulled upward, stretched thin, like his mind was trying to look through a pinhole in the fabric of reality. And he remembered what they made him do. At home, Daniel paced his apartment until the sky began to lighten with dawn. He wrote furiously in a spiral notebook, his handwriting growing more frantic with every page. Names surfaced. Dr. Marcus Bennett, the project lead. Icy blue eyes, always calm, always watching. Cameron Hayes, military liaison. Cigarette breath, cheap cologne. Barked orders like it was instinct. Preston Nichols, technician. Kind eyes. Sometimes slipped the kids candy bars when the others weren't looking. Preston Nichols. That name struck something deep, a thread, a key. As soon as the library opened, Daniel drove there, called in sick to work with a voice that barely sounded like his own. The librarian raised an eyebrow when he asked about the Montauk project, but eventually led him to a small, dusty shelf labeled Conspiracy and Fringe Science. Between a tattered book on Roswell and a volume about MK Ultra was a thin paperback. The Montauk Project, Experiments in Time by Preston B. Nichols and Peter Moon. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. The words leapt off the paper, confirming what he already knew in his gut. Camp Hero, psychic experiments, the Montauk chair, time manipulation. It was all there, and more. The book claimed the Montauk Project was a continuation of the infamous Philadelphia experiment, the alleged 1943 Navy test where the USS Eldridge was rendered invisible and teleported from Philadelphia to Norfolk. The deeper he read, the more Daniel's sense of reality splintered, not because it sounded insane, but because it didn't. Because it matched what was already inside his head. The book Daniel had been reading claimed the Montauk Project was shut down in 1983 after an incident, a bizarre, terrifying breach. A creature, nicknamed the Beast, had been psychically pulled through a dimensional gateway. It tore through the facility, killing or maiming anyone in its path until someone managed to cut the power. That, supposedly, was the end of it. The project was declared dead. But Daniel knew that was a lie. It hadn't ended. It had simply changed shape. The research didn't die with Montauk. It scattered, spread thin across a network of secret programs, embedded in sites around the country, compartmentalized, redundant. No single failure could ever again jeopardize the whole thing. That was the new strategy. Back in his apartment, Daniel stood silently in front of his closet, his eyes fixed on the top shelf. A locked metal box sat there, its cold surface faintly reflecting the dim light. He didn't remember putting it there, but somehow he knew exactly what it was, and he knew where the key was too, taped underneath the back of his dresser, waiting for him like it had been there for years. He peeled off the key with trembling fingers, opened the box, and stared inside. Just one thing rested there. A safety deposit key stamped US Bank. The next morning, Daniel stood in the quiet lobby of First National Bank in downtown Hartford. The marble floors echoed faintly with every step. He presented the key and his ID to the manager, who glanced at him with the neutral professionalism of someone trained not to ask questions. "This way," the man said, leading him past glass, offices into the secured vault area. Daniel followed without a word. Inside the vault, alone now, the manager slid open a heavy drawer and stepped back. Daniel leaned forward and unlocked it. Inside was a manila envelope, sealed with red tape printed with federal warning stripes and clearance codes. He shouldn't have had access to it, but he did. His fingers hesitated at first, then tore through the seal. He emptied the contents onto the small metal table. Photographs, spilled out, black and white, cold, clinical, children in hospital gowns, surrounded by machines. He froze. There, one of the kids, was him, maybe 10 years old, strapped to a chair, wires snaking from his arms and skull. He turned over another photo, his younger self again, sitting in a massive chair that looked more like a torture device. Tesla coils arced in the background. Banks of old computers blinked silently behind him. His small body was almost consumed by the machinery around him. There were documents too. Torn research notes, handwritten formulas and sketches of the Montauk chair. Half scientific, half nightmare. Equations that twisted in ways that hurt his eyes. A map of Camp Hero, its underground tunnels marked in bold red ink. At the bottom of the pile, one last item, a CD in a paper sleeve. No label, just a date scribbled in marker, August 12th, 1983. The day the beast came through. Daniel sat alone that night, the apartment too quiet. He slid the disc into his laptop with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. The drive whirred, then clicked. One video file appeared. He opened it. The screen flickered to life. Grainy black and white footage from a fixed security camera. The frame showed a concrete room, sterile and silent except for the machine in its center. The chair. He'd drawn it again and again in the margins of notebooks, on napkins, in dreams. Now, here it was. Real. A boy sat strapped into it. Daniel's. Breath caught. It was him. Electrodes covered his scalp. His eyes were half-lidded, like he'd been drugged. Men in lab coats stood nearby, checking readings on monitors. 2 soldiers flanked the doors, motionless like statues. Then a voice came from off-screen. Delta Protocol. Initiating in 3, 2, 1. The lights in the room dimmed. The chair hummed. Then the hum became a growl. A low electric scream that built to a shriek as sparks erupted from the equipment. The boy's body, his body, arched violently. Eyes rolled back, mouth open in a silent scream. Technicians jumped back, panic in their faces. The machines overloaded. One monitor exploded, glass spraying. And then, something tore. Not physically, not like wood or metal. The air itself split open at the center of the room. A swirling black void formed, writhing and pulsing like a wounded animal. It wasn't just a hole. It was alive. From the darkness, something moved. The screen crackled, static washing over it, the camera struggling to keep the feed stable. When it cleared, the room was chaos. People were screaming, running. One of the walls was smeared with blood. And just at the edge of the frame, partially hidden, was a shape that didn't make sense. It flickered through forms, like reality couldn't decide what it was. It had angles that bent the wrong way, limbs that retracted into themselves. Just looking at it made Daniel's head pound. And then, one last image. The boy in the chair, staring directly at the camera. Blood streamed from his nose and ears. His mouth moved slowly, deliberately. Daniel leaned in, reading his own lips. You have to shut it down before it opens again. Then, static. Daniel ejected the disc and sat frozen, the room spinning around him. Not just from the horror of what he'd seen, but from the slow, unstoppable wave building inside his own mind. Memories coming back. Pieces clicking into place that he didn't know were missing. He remembered the chair, the experiments, the voices, the pain. He remembered everything. The next morning, Daniel picked up his phone with a trembling hand. He dialed the only person who might still be alive, who might understand what he had become. The number had been burned into Daniel's mind for as long as he could remember. He never learned it, not consciously, yet it sat there, familiar, waiting. He didn't hesitate as he dialed. Hello? The voice on the other end was gravelly and guarded. An older man, cautious. Is this Preston Nichols? Daniel asked. A long pause. Static hummed faintly in the background. "Who's asking?" the man finally said. "My name is Daniel Cross. I was subject 17 at Montauk." Silence. Long enough that Daniel thought the call had dropped. Then, in a hushed voice, full of dread, "God help you, boy. They're still watching." "I need answers," Daniel said, his voice low and urgent. "Not over the phone," Nichols replied quickly. "They're always listening." A beat of hesitation. "Meet me at the lighthouse, tomorrow, noon." The line went dead. Daniel arrived at Montauk Point Lighthouse an hour early. He parked a rented sedan in the public lot, having left his own car behind in a grocery store parking garage miles away. He couldn't shake the fear, an itching paranoia that somewhere inside his personal vehicle, someone had planted something to track him. The lighthouse stood tall on the bluff, its iconic red and white bands striking against the backdrop of storm-heavy clouds. The wind from the Atlantic pushed inland with a salty, restless force. Everything about the scene felt wrong, like walking into a memory you weren't sure was yours. Nichols was already there. He sat on a weathered bench near the edge of the overlook, staring out at the crashing surf. He wore a battered fisherman's jacket and a faded Yankees cap, his posture hunched, his hands clasped between his knees. He didn't look up as Daniel approached. "They told us we were serving our country," he said flatly, eyes locked on the horizon. "Advancing human potential, pushing the boundaries of consciousness, opening frontiers, horseshit, all of it." Daniel sat beside him, the old wood creaking beneath his weight. "You were there. You helped them." "I did." Nichols nodded, his voice heavy. "And I've spent the last 40 years trying to live with that." He finally turned his head and for the first time looked at Daniel. His face was deeply lined, worn by time and guilt. "Jesus, you grew up. Last time I saw you, you were a skinny little kid. Quiet. Too much power in that head of yours." Daniel swallowed. "What did they do to me?" Nichols pulled out a crumpled pack of cigarettes. His hands shook as he lit one, the flame dancing wildly in the wind. He took a deep drag before answering. "You were special, even among the other sensitives. Most of the kids. They could pick up impressions, maybe move something across the room if they tried hard enough. But you could open things." "Doorways," Daniel murmured. The old man nodded. "Yeah, doorways. Doorways to where?" That was the question, wasn't it? Nichols exhaled slowly, smoke trailing off into the sea air. "At first, it was just remote viewing, teaching kids to spy with their minds. But then we realized a few of you could do more than see. You could reach through." He paused, looking away again. "And you, Daniel, you could pull things through." Daniel felt a tightness in his chest. He didn't remember it fully, but pieces were beginning to surface. They started with small jumps, Nichols went on. One room to another, then across the facility, then time, a few minutes, an hour, then days, years. Daniel felt his voice stick in his throat. "By 82, they had you reaching into places we didn't understand," Nichols said, almost in a whisper. "Other places." "The beast," Daniel said, his voice barely audible. Nichols' face went pale. "You remember? I found a recording." Nichols looked away sharply. "Then you know what came through wasn't from this world, not even our universe. That thing didn't follow our rules. Gravity, time, matter. It didn't care. It didn't belong here." He stubbed out his cigarette hard on the bench. "We lost 16 people that day. And the creature, it didn't die. It just vanished, folded itself into places we can't perceive, places that bleed into ours when the doors left open too long." Daniel winced as a headache surged behind his eyes. Flashbulbs of memory, lab rooms, screams, impossible shadows, flickered across his mind. They shut it down after that. "Officially, yeah," Nichols said bitterly. "Montauk was sealed. But you know how these things work. They didn't stop. They just hid deeper, moved the research to black sites, broke it into pieces, scattered it across programs so no one could trace the whole picture. Daniel stared at the surf. But I don't remember anything after that day. I have a whole life, school, college, a job, friends, all of it. Constructed, Nichols said. Synthetic identity, carefully designed. They used the best of MKUltra's techniques, trauma blocking, memory sculpting. They gave you a life and buried the rest. But why is it coming back now? Nichols glanced around, lowering his voice. That's the real question, isn't it? The programming doesn't just break down. Something's triggered it. Something's pulling you back in. Daniel was about to speak when everything shifted. It was like the world blinked. The sky brightened. The storm clouds were gone. The waves stilled. For a split second, the lighthouse beside them looked newer, paint fresh, glass gleaming. And Nichols was suddenly wearing a different jacket, a windbreaker instead of the fisherman's coat. Daniel gasped. His vision doubled. Two overlapping realities, both flickering like an old film reel spliced wrong. It's happening again, Nichols said, his voice echoing strangely, as though layered over itself. The world snapped back. Storm clouds, old bench, fisherman's coat. Daniel gripped the bench to steady himself, nausea rising. What the hell is happening to me? Nichols didn't look surprised, just deeply, terribly tired. Time's bleeding, he said quietly. The walls are thinning. And you, Daniel, you were always the key. You were the one who opened it. Daniel closed his eyes, but the images wouldn't stop. He remembered, more and more, and something, just on the other side, was waiting. Daniel's connection to the M-Tok chair had never really broken. It just quieted down, buried deep like a dormant infection. But now, it was stirring again. Nichols leaned in close. His face was flickering, not like a special effect, but like someone glitching between two states of being. For a second, he looked as Daniel remembered him. Tired, mid-50s, lines around the eyes. Then suddenly, he was a younger version. Fresh-faced, 20-something, the features sharper and less burdened by time. Listen to me, he said, voice tight, urgent. There's still an access point, one they forgot to seal. Bunker 14, near the old power station. The equipment, it's all still there. Before Daniel could ask a question, the world around them twisted, like water rippling in slow motion. A sick pressure built in his skull, like his brain was trying to turn inside out. When everything finally stopped shifting, Nichols was gone. In his place stood a teenage boy, but it wasn't just any boy. It was Nichols again. Same eyes, same posture, just 5 decades younger, wearing an old Camp Hero security badge that looked almost brand new. Find the failsafe before it's too late, the boy said in Nichols' gravelly voice, like he didn't even know. He'd changed. They're trying to recreate the conditions from '83, but they don't understand what they're messing with. The barrier, the membrane between our world and theirs. It's weaker now. The original experiments tore at it. They never healed. The boy flickered again, like a bad VHS recording, and the older Nichols reappeared, gasping like he'd surfaced from deep water. He grabbed Daniel's arm with surprising strength, his knuckles white. You have to go back, he rasped. Camp, Hero, Bunker 14. Destroy the chair before they can activate it again. Another pulse of distortion rolled over them, distorting everything. Sound, color, gravity. When it passed, Daniel was alone on the park bench. Tourists strolled by, chatting in German, glancing sideways at the pale man sitting stiffly as if he'd seen a ghost. That night, Daniel drove north under cover of darkness. Camp Hero loomed on the edge of the cliffs, as silent and imposing as it had been decades ago. He parked a mile out, moved quietly through the underbrush. The perimeter fence had new signage and fresh barbed wire, but he knew the weak spots. He always had. The layout hadn't changed. The ranger station was empty, locked but dark. He crept past, heading for the old access trail behind the turbines. Memories came flooding back with each step. Old corridors, shouted orders, the smell of ozone in the air. The power station stood like a fossilized giant, its turbines long dead. Behind it, half buried under vines and sand, was a squat concrete structure. The faded number 14 was barely visible on the rust-streaked door. The lock was broken. Recently. Daniel hesitated, then stepped inside. A narrow metal staircase led down, swallowed by darkness. He clicked on his flashlight and descended, the metallic echo of his boots sending shivers up his spine. The concrete walls gradually gave way to raw bedrock. The deeper he went, the colder it got. Not a natural cold, but charged, electric, the kind that made the fine hairs on his arms rise. At the bottom, a long corridor stretched into the black. As he walked, the distortions grew stronger. Flashes of light, heat, voices, all layered over each other like old film reels out of sync. For moments at a time, he wasn't alone. The corridor lit up with sterile overhead lights. Technicians bustled past him. Guards in fatigue stood at attention. He caught pieces of long-dead conversations. Laughter, warnings, ghosts of the past, stitched into the present. Finally, the corridor opened into a vast chamber. The vault door was open just wide enough for him to slip through. Inside was the heart of the Montauk Project. The chair stood at the center of the room like a sleeping monster, sleek, curved, and completely alien. Even inactive, it felt wrong, like it didn't belong in this world. It wasn't just old tech, it was impossible tech. It hummed quietly, and Daniel wasn't sure if the sound was real or just in his head. Surrounding it were workstations in various states of decay. Some looked like they were from the 60s, big toggles and blinking lights. Others were startlingly modern. Laptops, flat screens, toolboxes lay open. Coffee cups were half full. Someone had been here. Recently. A whiteboard leaned against a terminal, filled with scrawled equations and notes, and a countdown. Tomorrow night. Daniel took a step toward the chair, and his mind splintered. He was suddenly two people, the man he was now and the child he had been. In one moment, he was staring at the chair as an adult, heart racing. In the next, he was in it, 10 years old, wrists strapped down, blinking up at technicians in lab coats as they adjusted dials. "Good morning, Daniel," a voice echoed, doubling, from both then and now. "We've been waiting for you." He turned slowly. Dr. Bennett stepped out of the shadows. His face was older, his hair silver now, but his cold blue eyes were unchanged, still sharp, still calculating. "You," Daniel whispered. "You're still behind this." Bennett smiled slightly, circling him like a man inspecting a valuable specimen. "You didn't really think we'd walk away from the single greatest scientific discovery in history, did you? Especially not after you proved what was possible." Daniel's breath caught. His hands clenched into fists. "You need to shut this down," he said, "before it gets out of control." Bennett stopped. His expression hardened, but there was something else in his eyes now. Not surprise. Anticipation, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. "You don't understand what you're doing," Daniel said, his voice trembling but firm. "Oh, but we do," Bennett replied coolly, motioning to the array of blinking equipment around them. "Far better than you think." He walked with the calm assurance of a man who believed he'd already won. "We've spent 40 years refining this technology, studying the data, improving every flaw. What happened in '83? A setback, nothing more." 16 people died, Daniel said. "Progress demands sacrifice," Bennett snapped, his voice hardening like iron. "And now, you've returned, just as our models predicted. The prodigal son, back at the perfect moment." Daniel instinctively took a step backward, closer to the chair, every muscle in his body screaming to run, to fight. I came to destroy it. No, Bennett said with quiet certainty. You came because you're still part of it. Because on a quantum level, Daniel, you never left that chair. Daniel's breath hitched. Bennett glanced over Daniel's shoulder and gave a slight nod. Your memories, your life outside this place, none of it was real. Just a placeholder while your mind matured into what we needed. Daniel turned, but too late. He felt a sharp sting at the base of his neck. Something cold flooded into him. His knees buckled as the world tilted sideways. Voices blurred, lights smeared into smudges of white. Bennett's voice echoed as everything dimmed. Welcome home, Subject 17. Tomorrow you help us open the ultimate doorway. Daniel came to with a jolt. He was strapped into the chair again. Thick restraints bound his wrists and chest. Electrodes clung to his skin, sticky and cold. Around him, the bunker buzzed with activity. Banks of humming machines lined the chamber walls. Monitors blinked in rhythmic pulses. White-coated technicians moved methodically, checking readings, adjusting dials. Armed guards stood like statues, their weapons slung and ready. Daniel's head cleared, not just from sleep, but from years of fog. The haze was gone. Memories rushed back in vivid fragments. His childhood, the endless tests, the fear in the scientists' eyes as they realized they had opened something they couldn't. Close, and then the thing that had come through in '83, the thing that should never have crossed. Dr. Bennett appeared beside him, clipboard in hand. Consciousness has returned. Good. We're tight on time. The window opens soon. You can't do this, Daniel said, trying to move, his restraints cutting into his skin. You remember what happened last time. A miscalculation, Bennett replied, his tone clinical. The entity was unstable in our framework. This time, the variables are under control. Daniel's voice dropped. Integration. You're not just opening a door. You want to bring it through. Bennett didn't deny it. He almost looked amused. Not it, Daniel. Them. Or more precisely, someone else. He turned to a large monitor. It flickered through disturbing imagery. Biomechanical forms. Technologies that looked grown as much as built. Weapons unlike anything from Earth. Genetic blueprints, neural maps, alien architectures, all accompanied by brief bursts of coded data. Our visitors have so much to offer, Bennett said. Knowledge, power, evolution. We're standing at the edge of the next leap forward, and all they want is a place to live, Daniel said, bitterly. Hosts who can endure integration, Bennett confirmed, adjusting a dial. You've always been our most promising candidate. Daniel stared at him, horror carving deep into his chest. They're not visitors, they're invaders, and you're giving them the key. Bennett turned away unbothered. Power to 70%, he said to the technicians. Begin initialization. The chair vibrated beneath Daniel, a low hum rising in pitch. It wasn't just mechanical, it was alive. The sensations returned, the familiar stretching, pulling feeling, like his mind was being peeled outward and scattered across space. His vision blurred, shapes pulsed across the monitors. Waveforms danced in patterns he instinctively recognized, though he couldn't explain how. Quantum tunneling effect established, a technician called out. Temporal aperture forming. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut. They thought they were in control, that he was just a key. But they had forgotten something. Something he had only just remembered himself. He wasn't the key. He was the door. In '83, when the entity had come through, when everything had gone to hell, young Daniel had done something desperate, something no one knew. He had embedded a failsafe into the chair's structure, hidden deep within its quantum signature, an emergency trigger, a back door. Only he could access it. Now, as power surged around him and reality began to bend, Daniel focused inward, reaching into the part of himself that had always remained tethered to the machine. And he found it, still there, buried, but waiting. The failsafe. He reached through space-time, his consciousness stretching far beyond the bunker, beyond the Earth, into the vastness between worlds where they waited. They weren't just watching, they were pressing. He could feel them, immense and ancient, their minds brushing against his like whales moving beneath the surface of a black ocean. They were close, too close, and they were hungry. Aperture holding at 60%. A red warning light pulsed above the main console. One of the technicians swore under his breath and reached for the comms. "We need a systems check. Now. It's breaching. Dimensional boundaries are destabilizing." Dr. Bennett leaned over Daniel's slumped figure, his voice low, trembling not with fear but something closer to awe. "Can you feel them?" he whispered. "They've waited so long to meet us. Properly." Daniel didn't open his eyes, but his lips parted just enough to answer. "Yes," he said, his voice almost a breath. "I can feel them. But they're not what you think." From the control room came a sharp yell. "Power surge!" a technician shouted, eyes wide as the readings on his monitor spiked. "Systems are drawing more than we're supplying. Something's wrong." Bennett turned sharply, eyes narrowing. "That's impossible. Check the—" "It's me," Daniel interrupted calmly. Blood trickled from his nostrils, a thin, dark line trailing down to his lip. "I'm the power source now. I always was." Around them, the lab stuttered with chaos. Machines sparked violently, monitors shattered with popping cracks, and cables sizzled as if alive. Lights flickered overhead, and every system in the room began to shut down, draining toward the chair Daniel sat in. The metal restraints beneath him grew red-hot, blistering his skin. But Daniel barely flinched. Pain was irrelevant now. At the center of the chamber, the air thickened, twisting like it had weight. Reality itself folded in on itself, creased and warped like paper crumpled by an unseen hand. From within that aperture came flashes of another place, a realm beyond any human dream or nightmare. Towering architectures that twisted endlessly in shapes that hurt to look at. Beings that weren't made of flesh but of light, thought, something, alien. "Yes," Bennett gasped, eyes gleaming. "It's working." A technician rushed to him, panic etched into every line of his face. "Sir, look at the neural patterns. The subject, Daniel, he's rewriting the coordinates. He's overriding the system. Cut the neural feed. Pull him out," Bennett barked. "We can't," the tech said, voice cracking. "He's bypassed all safeguards. We're locked out." Daniel's eyes snapped open. They glowed, softly at first, but with a light that deepened, brightened, until it wasn't just illumination. It was presence. The glow didn't cast shadows. It erased them. His voice echoed strangely, laced with sounds that didn't belong in the human spectrum. "I'm not opening a door for them to come here," he said. "I'm creating a vacuum, a one-way passage." The aperture expanded with a deep groan, sucking in air with a howl. Papers, instruments, chairs, all started sliding toward it. The room was becoming a wind tunnel to another universe. "What are you doing?" Bennett screamed over the noise, clutching a railing. "What I should have done 40 years ago," Daniel said. The restraints shattered as Daniel's body began to lift, slowly, unnaturally, suspended by forces that didn't obey gravity. His limbs floated, his hair whipped, in the rush of air. The glow from his body intensified until he was nearly a silhouette in pure white. "I'm collapsing the bridge," he said, "permanently." A guard lost his footing, screamed, and vanished into the swirling vortex. His body twisted grotesquely as he was stretched and pulled into the aperture, gone in an instant. Others clung to whatever they could. Pipes, consoles, bolted to the floor, each second a battle for survival. "You'll destroy everything," Bennett shouted, crawling toward the controls on hands and knees. "Only the infection," Daniel said. "The chair, the tech, the gateway, none of it belongs here." The aperture emitted a sound like the universe itself being torn open. It widened, swallowing the chair. Metal groaned and bent like it was made of taffy, drawn into the void. Consoles exploded, circuitry dissolved into sparks and ash. Bennett lunged one last time, grabbing for Daniel's arm, his face twisted with desperation. "We were so close," he cried. Daniel looked down at him. In that moment, something human flickered in his eyes. Pity. They were never going to share with us, Doctor, Daniel said quietly. We weren't partners. We were food. The floor gave out. Beams snapped. Chunks of ceiling crashed down. The entire underground facility groaned like a dying animal, pulled toward the black hole that now filled the center of the room. And through the chaos, something moved. It wasn't coming through the aperture. It was being pulled back. Daniel saw it, just barely, just long enough to regret seeing. A shape too big for his mind to fully register, like it existed half in vision, half in understanding. Countless eyes, shifting geometries, and a presence that spoke directly to his thoughts, not with words, but with concepts. You have closed the way, but there are other doors, other keys. Daniel felt his consciousness slipping, ebbing away, like light at the edge of dusk. With the last of his will, he forced one final surge of energy into the breach, sealing it with himself as the lock. Then, silence. He woke to the soft, steady beep of hospital monitors. The air was sterile, the light gentle. Sunlight filtered through half-closed Venetian blinds, casting pale stripes across crisp white sheets. He blinked slowly. Every muscle in his body ached as though he hadn't moved in weeks. His limbs felt like strangers. He was alive, but not whole. Something was gone. Something else had taken its place. A soft rustle pulled Daniel from the haze of sleep. A nurse, noticing his eyes open, offered a startled smile and quickly slipped out of the room. Moments later, a doctor entered, a woman with gentle eyes and a calm, measured tone. "You're lucky," she said, reviewing his chart. "You were found unconscious on the beach near Montauk Point, severely dehydrated, some exposure injuries, but no broken bones. You've been in a coma for 6 days." Daniel sat up slightly, each motion stiff, as if his joints had rusted shut. "What happened to me?" she asked gently. He blinked at the white sheets, the window light, the IV drip in his arm. "I don't remember," he lied. She nodded slowly, not pushing further. 3 days later, Daniel signed the discharge forms against medical advice. His body still ached, but his mind was sharp, alert in a way it hadn't been in years. His apartment was quiet when he returned. Too quiet. Nothing looked out of place, but he could feel it. An unnatural stillness, a psychic residue left behind like the faint trace of a scent. Every drawer had been opened and shut again with exact precision. No mess, no signs of struggle, but it had been searched, thoroughly and professionally. His computer was gone. So were his journals, pages of diagrams, memories, sketches. In their place, sitting dead center on his desk, was a slim manila folder. Inside, a single document, an official offer from the Department of Energy, triple his current salary, no job description, just a start date and a signature line. The message was unmistakable. Forget, accept, obey, live comfortably, under surveillance. Daniel stared at it for a long time. Then he struck a match and burned the document page by page in the kitchen sink. By the end of the week, he had visited a dozen stores across the city using cash only. He bought a high-end laptop, a series of encrypted drives, radio components, frequency modulators. From back-alley tech dens and hobbyist electronics shops, he gathered parts that could be cobbled into something dangerous, a broadcast system strong enough to hijack signals, radio, television, and digital streams. In a dim motel room under a false name, Daniel assembled the last pieces. Wires ran across the cheap carpet. The air buzzed with heat and old cigarette smoke. The device wasn't pretty, but it worked. He flipped the final switch. The room filled with a low hum, and a red light blinked to life on the camera. He sat, down in front of the lens, face pale and drawn, but steady. "My name is Daniel Cross," he said, voice steady. "Until recently, I was Subject 17 of a classified US government project known as MTOC. What I'm about to tell you will sound like science fiction. I wish it was." He took a breath, then continued. Montauk wasn't just an urban legend, it was real. In the late 70s and early 80s, at a place called Camp Hero, an old Air Force base in Montauk, New York, the government ran experiments in psychic manipulation, teleportation, and dimensional travel. They used children. Children, like me, children with unusual mental abilities. He shifted in his seat, as if the weight of those memories threatened to pull him under. They discovered that the human mind, under the right conditions, and with a device they called the Montauk chair, could do more than just read thoughts or bend metal. It could bend reality. It could open cracks between dimensions. Daniel's voice grew more intense. They made contact, or what they thought was contact. Beings from outside our universe, things that exist outside time, outside space. Not angels, not aliens, something else. Predators. He leaned closer to the camera, blood beginning to trail from one nostril. They didn't want to help us. They wanted to enter, to feed. And the people running the program, the ones in charge, they were willing to make deals. In 1983, we lost control. Something came through. We called it the Beast. 16 people died. Officially, the project was buried after that. But it wasn't shut down. It just went deeper, fragmented, hidden. He wiped the blood from his upper lip and continued. "Last week they tried again. They brought me back. The best of the old subjects, they said. They needed me to open a stable gateway, a permanent bridge." His voice cracked slightly, not with fear, but with the strain of remembering. I collapsed the breach instead, destroyed the chair, shut it down from the inside. But they're still out there. The project, the collaborators, and the ones on the other side. Daniel exhaled shakily. They can't come through directly anymore, not like before, but their influence, it's already here, subtle, infectious, a whisper in a powerful man's ear, a blueprint slipped into the right hands. The Montauk tech still exists, in pieces, under different names, scattered across facilities you'll never hear about. His eyes locked on the camera. Watch for the signs, military outposts in strange locations, missing children with unique talents the news barely covers, weather patterns that break all logic, people who act wrong, like they're reciting a role instead of living it. The hum of the transmission deepened. He leaned closer. They're still trying, still pushing. And if I disappear after this, if you hear I've overdosed or vanished or lost my mind, know this. I was silenced, but I'm not the only one left, and they haven't won yet. The screen flickered, and then it cut to black. "These are the fingerprints," Daniel said, voice low and tense, "of operations that didn't stop when Montauk was shut down." He stared into the camera, eyes glassy, haunted, but unwavering. "I'm uploading everything I've found. Images, partial research notes, coordinates of locations I believe are continuation sites. There's more evidence, stashed in secure drop points. If anything happens to me, it'll be released automatically." He leaned in, his face now filling the screen. Shadows etched under his eyes like bruises from sleepless nights. "Listen to your gut. If something feels off, fundamentally wrong, in a way you can't put into words, don't ignore it. The membrane between worlds. It's thin now, thinner than it's ever been. Things slip through, even without a full-sized gate." A long pause. He swallowed, visibly battling something unspoken. "They made us forget. But memory doesn't just fade. It waits. And when it wakes up," his gaze hardened, "especially when it remembers the future. The screen went dark. The message was over. Daniel sat back, his hand trembling, slightly as he hit send. The files, scans of classified documents, distorted photographs, hand-drawn maps, began uploading through a distribution network he'd spent years building, encrypted, anonymized, seeded across thousands of servers. Even if someone found and deleted a few, the rest would survive. There were too many now, too many backups, too many eyes. His laptop screen flickered, static rushing over it like frost, crawling across glass. But buried in the noise were patterns, shapes, rhythms. Weeks ago, they had haunted him from the television in his apartment, indecipherable and maddening. But now he understood. It wasn't interference. It was a signal, not from them, the ones who had silenced Montauk, but from others like him. The children of that project, scattered, hidden, awakening one by one. They were remembering too. The pieces were coming together across miles of fiber optic cable and dead airwaves. Daniel smiled, barely. He wasn't alone. He shut the laptop and packed his bag, just a few essentials, things that couldn't be traced. Outside, beyond the stained motel curtains, 2 black SUVs rolled into the parking lot. The engine hum was soft but unmistakable. Men in black stepped out, moving with crisp, quiet precision. Too late. The truth was already out. His voice was already spreading, like a signal through static. Someone out there was listening, and someone out there would understand. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, calm now. He could hear the boots approaching, but the fear was gone. What Montauk had done to him, what they had awakened, wasn't gone. It had just been waiting, sleeping. He closed his eyes and reached inward, deep, past fear, past thought, past the physical, through the folds of space and time. He could feel it, the threads connecting everything, invisible, vibrating, waiting for a touch. There were other places, other times. He'd been their best gate opener. That wasn't a skill, it was who he was. The door burst open. 2 agents swept in, guns raised. But the room was empty. No broken window, no signs of struggle, just silence. On the bed, Daniel's phone buzzed once. A single message glowed on the screen, addressed to Dr. Bennett. There are other doors, other keys, and now I have them all. 3 days later, across the globe, screens flickered. Just for a second, a symbol appeared, a triangle intersecting a perfect circle. Then it vanished. No one officially acknowledged it. No one could explain. It, the MTOC project, Montauk's true name, was never confirmed by any government. Journalists who pursued it either went silent or suffered accidents. The broadcast was dismissed as a hoax. A disturbed man, they said. Fabricated documents, conspiracy madness. But things started happening. Children had vivid, identical dreams of concrete tunnels, metal doors, glowing machines humming beneath the earth. Scientists near certain military sites reported strange temporal distortions, brief warps in time, data corrupted without cause, GPS errors localized to tight, unexplainable clusters. Even in the static between radio stations, in the flicker of untuned TVs, people began to hear things, a whisper, just out of reach. They made us forget. But memory is a dangerous thing, especially when it remembers the future, and the symbol returned, on old CRTs, scratched into classroom desks, drawn in the condensation on mirrors. Quiet, unprovable. But there, the story became legend, a modern myth about a whistleblower who exposed not just a conspiracy, but a rupture in reality itself. A man who vanished the moment the truth became undeniable. This is False Skies, a story about memory, silence, and the things our governments would do to make sure we never remember. But some memories don't stay buried. 2 decades had passed since the towers fell, since the world was reshaped in fear's image. And now, from the quiet corners of America's forgotten machinery, a new name emerged into the light. Thomas Keane. He wasn't a soldier or a politician. He wasn't even the type who raised his voice at meetings. Just a former FBI data analyst. Unremarkable, methodical, invisible. That's what made him so dangerous. One quiet afternoon, in a motel just off a sun-bleached Arizona highway, Keane pressed send. He had no illusions about what would follow. He wasn't trying to be a martyr. He wasn't seeking redemption. He was just tired. Tired of carrying truths too heavy for one man to hold. The flash drive he clutched had been with him for years, passed through layers of encrypted proxies, wiped and rewritten more times than he could count. Its contents? Codenamed Black Dust, a file that looked harmless enough at first glance. But inside were documents that could crumble the foundations of the post-attack world order. Top secret memos, cargo manifests, redacted briefings, emails laced with euphemisms for things no decent human being would ever approve. All of it hinting, no, confirming, that the attack 2 decades ago hadn't just been foreseen. It had been allowed, designed, and used. Keane wiped his clammy palms on his jeans. The motel smelled like scorched coffee and mildew. The mattress groaned when he shifted. Outside, the hum of passing trucks reminded him that the world, as always, kept moving. He connected to a secure network he'd built from scratch. Layers of spoofed IPs, dead drop relays, and international bounces. Then he uploaded the file to a whistleblower site known for surviving takedown attempts by state actors. He added a single message for the dead who never had a voice and the living who still don't know the truth. Then he clicked upload. Within minutes, Black Dust was seeded to multiple mirror servers. Within an hour, it was in the inboxes of veteran journalists and an independent news outlet that had a long, bruised history of publishing uncomfortable truths. In New York, the editorial board gathered in tense silence, eyes scanning each line, verifying metadata, cross-referencing language styles and timestamps. The deeper they went, the quieter the room became. The evidence was damning. By evening, the first article went live. Unverified documents suggest orchestrated catalytic event. Preceded global war on terror. It came with warnings, caveats, and the usual disclaimers. Alleged, unconfirmed, potentially forged. But readers weren't stupid. Some knew in their bones this wasn't fabricated. Conspiracy forums erupted in a frenzy. Reddit threads ballooned to hundreds of comments per minute. Twitter exploded. The mainstream media called it a glitch, maybe an AI-generated deepfake. A foreign influence operation, said the White House. Disinformation designed to destabilize public trust. But those who actually read the documents weren't so sure. Typed memos, dated months before the attack, described the need for a unifying incident to consolidate domestic consensus and catalyze long-term overseas deployments. Insurance records showed massive last-minute policy upgrades on specific floors. Communications from NORAD reflected confusion over wargame, simulations that, coincidentally, mirrored the actual attack scenario. It was too much, too aligned, too deliberate. Back in his motel room, Thomas watched the chaos unfold on the flickering television. His name hadn't been mentioned yet, but it was only a matter of time. He sighed as the news anchor stammered through a government statement calling the leak Russian-style propaganda. The script had started. He closed the laptop, slid it into a weathered backpack, and stood. His heart was steady now. He knew this would happen. He'd known for years. The question had never been if he'd be hunted. Only when. As he walked out into the desert dusk, his mind wandered to the years spent in the bureau. How he'd quietly requested access to anomaly reports related to the attack. How the deeper he dug, the stranger it got. Private defense contracts inked days after the incident, defense budgets ballooning, the the same elite names appearing again and again. He hadn't told anyone. He just copied what he found. He waited. And today, he stopped waiting. The hunt had begun. Somewhere, a special task force was already activating its network. Facial recognition sweeps, ATM pings, phone triangulation, but they wouldn't find him easily. Thomas had learned from the best while pretending to be the best of them. In a control room beneath a nondescript building in DC, red alerts were flashing. "Who the hell is this guy?" a young agent barked. "Used to be one of ours," a senior officer muttered grimly. "Data division, quiet, smart, never raised flags." "Then why now?" The older man didn't answer. He just stared at the triangle-inscribed flash drive image on the screen, then at the words printed across the top of one of the leaked pages, MTOC, Memory Trigger Operations Kernel. Status: decommissioned, unconfirmed, active personnel, redacted. The war that followed the attacks had made trillions. Empires had risen in the ashes, and somewhere in those ashes, a paper trail had survived. Keane wasn't running anymore. He was moving, purposefully. Each step taking him closer to the next drop, the next reveal. This was no longer a leak. It was a reckoning. And the silence that had buried the truth for 20 years had finally been shattered. By the second night, the machinery of the state was humming with quiet panic. The name Thomas Keane was now etched into internal watch lists, alongside foreign operatives and homegrown extremists. Not because he had set off a bomb, not because he'd hacked government servers, but because he had told the truth. In Langley, and beyond, murmurs echoed through glass-walled corridors. Eldridge Shaw, the elusive director of a classified intelligence consortium known only in whispers as Section Veritas, convened a meeting beneath the Pentagon in a lead-lined chamber that didn't officially exist. No phones allowed, no transcripts kept, just a mission: neutralize the narrative, silence the source, reclaim the illusion. Shaw, once hailed as a master of psychological operations in Cold War black zones, believed in one unwavering principle: a well-maintained lie is more stable than a chaotic truth. He stared at the wall-sized monitor showing a looping profile of Keane, early academy photo, clean suit, expression blank. Next to it, the black dust archive blinking like a virus infecting the secure feed. "This is not about documents," Shaw said, voice calm as a scalpel. "This is about perception. If we lose the perception, we lose the structure. Containment is paramount." He gave the order. At that moment, 3 separate units went operational. A cyber suppression team began flooding servers, hosting black dust with denial of service attacks. A media operations group circulated talking points for friendly pundits to cast doubt on the source, framing Keane as emotionally unstable, a disgruntled loner. And the shadow team, codenamed Pale Veil, was dispatched to locate and retrieve, or eliminate, the leaker. But while Shaw plotted erasure, the internet burned. The term false skies trended within 24 hours, carrying with it a visceral sense of betrayal. TikTokers dissected PDF files. Ex-military whistleblowers chimed in anonymously. Podcasts emerged overnight, calling it the real 9/11 Commission. Then came the infographics. Charts showed policy shifts days after the attack. Insurance, anomalies, war simulations that bore eerie resemblance to the real events. Keane had anticipated skepticism. He'd baked verifiable metadata, original timestamps, and hidden code signatures into black dust. The skeptics couldn't easily refute the files. Origin, only its implications. In living rooms, arguments flared. Some believed the leaks proved that the very system meant to protect them had orchestrated a tragedy for geopolitical gain. Others clung harder to the official narrative, unwilling to believe such monstrous intent could come from within. But beneath it all, the collective trust fracture had already begun. Meanwhile, Thomas Keane, now a fugitive, stared through the frost-laced window of a remote forest cabin. His only connection to the outside world was a battery-powered radio and a heavily encrypted burner laptop that ran on mesh network proxies bouncing through obsolete satellites. He read the encrypted message again. Your documents align with classified fragments I uncovered years ago. I can prove authenticity. Let's talk. S. Voss. He remembered Sarah Voss, blacklisted after a damning expose on NORAD drills that strangely mirrored the 9/11 scenario. Her reputation had been destroyed, but Keane remembered her truthfulness. She had seen the smoke before anyone else admitted there was a fire. He replied with a simple phrase. Trust lives at the intersection of risk and proof. Let's meet. 2 days. Black Hollow Reservoir. Dock 4. Noon. Come alone. In DC, Eldridge Shaw learned of Voss's online activity. She's the vector, he growled. Cut the signal. A junior agent hesitated. She's clean. No ties to foreign actors. If we silence her, it becomes a martyrdom story. Shaw stared for a long moment. Then discredit her. Leak the old rehab records. Frame her as unstable. Do not let her speak to Keane. Orders rippled outward like a stone dropped into the still surface of a lie. In a quiet coffee shop on the outskirts of Baltimore, Sarah Voss sipped her drink and stared at her laptop screen. Surveillance shadows pressed in, but she'd lived in paranoia for years. It taught her one thing. The most dangerous stories are the ones no one wants to hear. She'd once risked everything to publish a report on how Operation Vigilant Guardian had coincidentally simulated the exact airline hijackings on the morning of 9/11. It got her fired, blacklisted, but now, this was different. The documents Keane had leaked were the missing key. Memos that referenced spectral scenarios, strategic casualties, and the chilling phrase, paint the skies false to unify the ground below. 2 days later, the meeting at Black Hollow Reservoir began beneath a bruised sky. Keane approached slowly, watching the tree line. Voss was already there, her hands visible, no phone in sight. They didn't speak right away. Then, "You brought it?" she asked. He nodded. A new drive, not black dust. This one was worse. Project Echo Mirror, he whispered. They didn't just know. They rehearsed it. Voss paled. "You mean..." "Yes," he said. "And I have the logs. From a distant hill, a sniper team marked them both. Command, we have visuals. Confirming target Keane. Secondary is Voss." A pause crackled on the comms. Then, chillingly, "Hold fire. The leak is spreading faster than containment. Change in strategy. Make it look like an accident." Back at Section Veritas, Shaw reviewed a new report. Downloads of black dust had now crossed 17 million. He rubbed his temples. "We didn't stop the story, we multiplied it." "Sir," an aide said, "one of the internal memos references an even older operation, predating the attacks. Something called Trinity Loop." Shaw looked up, startled. Where did that name come from? Buried in the metadata of Keane's drive, Shaw stood slowly. For the first time, he looked afraid. Others recoiled at the very idea that the last 20 years of war and surveillance might have been carefully orchestrated. Most dismissed it outright. But Thomas Keane had never been like most. Once a meticulous data analyst at the FBI, Thomas had quietly earned a reputation for connecting threads others ignored. He wasn't flashy, never raised his voice in meetings. But 2 years ago, he started asking too many questions. Questions about odd inconsistencies in pre-9/11 intelligence, reports that didn't align, dates that didn't match up. When no one listened, he kept digging. By the time he left the bureau, no one knew he'd spent months duplicating files, classified, buried reports that were set to be sealed forever. Now, his former supervisors were on camera, denouncing him as unstable. "A man caught up in conspiracies," they said, "possibly radicalized." What they didn't mention was how those same conspiracies had come dangerously close to triggering internal investigations, until the higher-ups shut it all down. In a quiet suburb just outside Washington, D.C., a sleek black SUV crept to a stop in front of a modest beige house. The lawn was dry, the porch light flickering slightly. 4 men in dark suits stepped out, no badges, no greetings. They moved like they had every right to be there. Inside, a middle-aged data engineer opened the door, confused and uneasy. He'd worked with Keane back in the day. The men didn't offer names. One flashed a federal-looking ID too quickly to read. "We need to see your computer," the lead one said. Before the man could protest, they were already inside, splitting up, one heading for the office, another pulling a laptop bag from under the kitchen table. They typed quickly, pulled flash drives from their jackets, copied emails, messages, anything that mentioned Keane, black dust, or encrypted folders of old bureau files. It wasn't just him. That night, similar visits were made to 3 more homes, all former FBI analysts who had once shared coffee with Keane or exchanged quiet jokes about suspicious memos. None of the agents had warrants. They didn't need them. They were watchers, an unofficial domestic counterintel team that didn't exist on paper, an enforcement arm of what people whispered about as the Black Archive, a hybrid creation of intelligence brass and defense industry insiders. Their orders came from deep inside the post-9/11 apparatus. At the top of that chain sat Director Eldridge Shaw, a cold, silver-haired strategist in charge of the consolidated intelligence entity born from tragedy. From a towering glass office overlooking the Capitol, Shaw monitored the manhunt with clinical precision. He remembered the morning of 9/11, how the dust hadn't even settled before the Patriot Act was signed, how every new surveillance tool was approved without hesitation. He'd risen fast by pushing those measures forward, selling them as necessary, patriotic. His network included weapons manufacturers, private contractors, even members of Congress. Now, the leaks threatened to expose the whole mechanism. "Find him," Shaw told his aides, voice low but firm. "Reeve Keane. Whatever name he's using now. We cannot let conspiracy theories undo 20 years of progress." Keane knew they were closing in. He saw the signs everywhere, subtle changes in highway checkpoints, roadside cameras that lingered too long. He ditched his sedan in a Walmart parking lot and picked up a beat-up pickup from a contact. Switched plates. He carried no electronics except a burner flip phone. Bought food with cash. His diet had shrunk to energy bars and gas station, jerky. At night, he slept in motels off desolate roads, never the same one twice. He paid under a false name, an identity from a long-expired government credential that still fooled the occasional night clerk. Each evening, as he locked the motel door and double-checked the deadbolt, a knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach. Any second, he thought. Any second that SUV could slide into the parking lot, headlights off, men in black stepping out. Then, a flicker of hope. A secure message pinged through the encrypted chat app he checked only once a day. "SV. We need to meet. I can help verify the files. I have reach. People in alternative media still trust me. But time's running out. Sarah Voss." He'd read her. Work. Deep dives into CIA front groups, shady defense contracts. A journalist with real integrity, not just a provocateur chasing views. Still, meeting in person was risky, but without a credible voice, his files would be buried in online noise, written off as doctored or delusional. He agreed. They set the meeting for the following night at a closed library in a sleepy coastal town 2 hours south. As he rolled into the parking lot, the sun had just dipped behind the horizon. Streetlights hummed to life. His eyes caught the silhouette of an unmarked sedan parked just beyond the library entrance. He didn't stop. Kept driving. Circled the block. When he returned, the sedan hadn't moved. Could have been a librarian, working late, or a watcher. He killed the engine and sat in the silence for a moment, heart pounding like a drum. Then he stepped out, slid the USB drive from his jacket, and walked toward the library. Inside, the building was dark, save for one flickering fluorescent near the back. "Thomas," a voice said. He turned. Sarah Voss stood in the aisle, tall, sharp eyes under tired lids. Her leather jacket looked like it had been through 3 wars. She offered a hand. "I believe you," she said quietly. "I always have. The story's been off from the beginning." Keane nodded slowly, his face drawn, pale from stress. He slid into the chair opposite her and pushed the drive across the table. "This is it," he said, voice cracked. "It's everything. The memos, the backdoor deals with contractors, flight path tampering, internal messages, some calling the hijackers assets that went rogue." He stopped, his throat tightening. They didn't just fail to stop. They let it happen. Maybe even helped it along. Sarah sat still, barely breathing. "They used the bodies," he whispered, "to build an empire of fear." Sarah picked up the drive, her fingers trembling. The weight of it was more than plastic and silicon. It was the truth, or at least the start of it. Sarah's eyes scanned the files on her laptop, her expression tightening. With every scroll, she paused, mouth slightly open as she read through entries referencing offshore accounts and cryptic mentions of Operation Silence. Her brows furrowed. "This is explosive," she said, glancing up at Keane. "But we can't just dump it on my blog. They'll call it fake, fringe. We'll be blocked or shut down before it even gains traction." Keane leaned forward, his fingers twitching near the USB still on the table. "We need something bigger," she continued. "Someone on the inside. A journalist with just enough mainstream pull to be credible, but rebellious enough to take the risk. Or," she hesitated, "we stage a live drop, something public, loud, where too many eyes are on it for them to bury it without raising more suspicion." Thomas nodded grimly. The idea of going public so boldly terrified him, but at this point, fear was a constant companion. Suddenly, a muffled noise broke their focus, a dull thump from the front of the library. Both of them froze. A figure in dark clothes loomed outside the glass door, trying to peer in. Keane's spine stiffened. He reached for the drive and slipped it into his jacket. Sarah quietly closed the laptop, pressing her finger to her lips. They ducked between dusty shelves, crouching low behind a bookcase. Footsteps echoed softly, too soft to tell if they were coming closer. But then, "Hello!" a shaky old voice called out. The library's caretaker, oblivious and holding a mop, stepped into view. The shadow outside retreated. They waited, barely breathing, until the old man shuffled into another room. Keane stood slowly, his pulse still pounding in his ears. "Could have been nothing," he muttered. "Or it was someone checking the perimeter," Sarah replied. "Either way, we can't stay." They agreed to meet again in 48 hours, near a larger city, where they planned to infiltrate a local news station. One that still had a reputation for integrity. Barely. If they could get an unfiltered live broadcast, the story might finally reach the masses. But every step now came with mounting danger. That evening, as Thomas holed up in yet another motel, this one reeking of mildew and bleach, his burner phone buzzed. A single message from an old colleague who had once helped him decode flight analysis logs. "One of our guys is dead. Boat accident. They're picking us off." The message cut out abruptly. No signature, just dread. Keane sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling. The watchers had started cleaning up, removing anyone who could confirm the file's authenticity. That window for truth, already small, was shrinking fast. Out on the streets, protests had begun to spread. Whispers of official foreknowledge made their way into angry chants. Some people carried photos of the 9/11 victims, demanding respect. Others waved signs, "We deserve the truth." The administration responded with aggression. The president didn't speak, but Director Shaw did, calm, crisp, and cold. "In times like these," he said from a polished podium, "misinformation is a threat to national unity. We will find and prosecute all domestic agitators spreading baseless, foreign-manufactured conspiracies. Keane watched from the motel TV, the volume muted, but the message clear. Shaw wasn't bluffing. Back at her apartment, Sarah was diving deeper. She stumbled upon something chilling, oblique references buried in the files, repeated in old budget records and redacted communications, the Saturn files. "What the hell is Saturn?" she whispered. And then it hit her. An archive, not just of memos and surveillance data, but of money. The ledger of post-attack financial flows, showing how government budgets had been funneled into shadow accounts, black ops projects, defense, firms, oil conglomerates, and political campaigns. If they could find the full Saturn archive, it wouldn't just prove the conspiracy. It would reveal the motive: profit. Greed dressed as patriotism. They met again in a safe house owned by one of Sarah's oldest contacts, a paranoid former tech contractor who had gone completely off-grid. The place was dusty, full of canned food, broken monitors, and a single lamp casting yellow light. Keane spread the new files out like puzzle pieces. Sarah cross-referenced them with older CIA memos they'd found, tracing phrases like decentralized Saturn cache and NSI financial. Noda, a pattern emerged. The Saturn archive had been housed, at least partially, in a decommissioned NSA facility, miles into the desert, somewhere near the border of Arizona and New Mexico. "That place is supposed to be empty," Keane muttered, rubbing his temples. Sarah shook her head. "Rumors say it was never fully shut down, just blacked out of existence. If we get in," she said, eyes locked on his, "we download everything, the raw data. Then we go public." He nodded, but the weight of it felt crushing. All they had was a clunky car, a few burner phones, less than $3,000 in cash, and some aging laptops. The Watchers, on the other hand, had surveillance drones, satellite imaging, and operatives trained to erase problems permanently. But the Watchers wouldn't expect a direct infiltration. Not from two fugitives this low, on resources, not at a site thought to be dead. Maybe, just maybe, that gave them an edge. Meanwhile, Director Shaw tightened the net. His voice now echoed through every press conference, school announcement, and social feed. He pushed the line that the leaks were foreign disinfo. The public, tired and scared, mostly believed him. But a growing minority, those reading the leaked files, hearing whistleblower families speak, started questioning the narrative. Then came more accidents. A journalist who'd written about 9/11 inconsistencies died in a sudden electrical fire. A former Air Force analyst drowned in a pool alone at night. A cybersecurity expert's car veered off a cliff with no skid marks. The message was clear: stay quiet or disappear. As the days dwindled, Keane and Sarah operated like ghosts. They swapped cars again, moved between safe houses, spoke only in code. But the facility loomed large in their minds. Somewhere in that desert lay the Saturn archive. If they could crack it open and bring it to light, they wouldn't just challenge the official story. They'd expose the entire scaffolding of corruption built on tragedy. And the Watchers knew it. A final order had already been given. Deploy the Black Ops unit. Lethal force authorized. If Keane and Sarah got too close, there would be no arrests, only silence. People had begun to question everything. If it's all fake, they asked, then why are they chasing people down and killing them? No one had an answer, except maybe the truth was too ugly to admit. One data archivist, well known in underground circles, was found dead in his apartment, shot twice in the chest. The news called it a botched robbery, never once mentioning that he'd just leaked sensitive files linked to the Saturn documents. On social media, the phrase "black dust" was trending, shorthand for the digital trail left behind by whistleblowers silenced too soon. Across the cities, protests flared. In the square, handmade signs rose above the crowds. "We deserve the truth and stop killing our whistleblowers." The Watchers, The shadowy government agency suspected of covering up the Saturn files responded by calling them rioters. Arrests skyrocketed. Keem stayed quiet, his mind racing. If the Saturn files were real, they could prove something catastrophic, direct. Financial transfers from corporate boards to high-ranking officials, perfectly timed with votes that passed bloated war budgets. And all of it tied to a false flag attack that changed the world. No wonder they're stopping at nothing, Sarah said one night, voice low and tired. They'd gone underground. Fake IDs, burner phones, cash only. Every night, a new motel. Every morning, a new escape route. They avoided highways, knowing traffic cams and plate readers would flag them instantly. They guessed the watchers suspected they were chasing more data, but probably didn't know where they were headed. Not. Yet, the stress was wearing them thin. Paranoia had become their daily routine. The government had plastered Keem's face on news channels and billboards with bold red letters. Wanted, domestic terrorist. The reward? Enough money to turn family against blood. Keem wore a baseball cap low over his face and tinted glasses that gave him migraines, but it didn't matter. Each hour felt like a gamble. On a lonely stretch of back road, a black SUV appeared in the rearview mirror, closing fast. Not good, Sarah muttered, already turning off onto a dirt road that cut through farmland. The SUV followed. Shots cracked the air, sharp, deafening. A bullet tore through one of their tires. The car spun out and slammed into a ditch. No time to think. They grabbed what they could and ran into the tall cornfields. The SUV's doors slammed. Boots hit dirt. Flashlights danced across the field. They ducked low, breath locked in their chests. Sarah's hand trembled on the grip of her small pistol. The agents moved through the stalks, searching. Then, silence. The flashlights turned away. The watchers were leaving. Too public, Keem whispered. Too messy. They waited until the SUV's taillights vanished, then slowly crawled out from the corn, skin scratched, clothes damp with sweat. We must be close, Sarah whispered, eyes wide. They're getting reckless. They reached the old NSA site 3 days later, just before sunset. The air was still. The place was ghosted, fence rusted, gates fallen, the cracked pavement split by weeds. No signs of life, just an empty carcass of what once watched the world. Perfect place to hide something, Keem said. They found a hole in the fence, maybe from looters or desperate seekers before them. Inside, the main building loomed like a tomb, windows boarded, roof sagging, vents wheezing softly in the wind. Lone Coyote howled somewhere beyond the ridge. Inside, the place was suffocatingly still. Dust blanketed the cubicles like ash. Old chairs lay tipped over. Memos and coffee mugs from a decade ago sat untouched. They moved with flashlights, careful not to leave too many footprints. Eventually, in the basement, they found what they were looking for. A room filled with decaying server racks. Some of them were still alive, just barely. A low hum buzzed from one corner. That's suspicious, Keem muttered. Someone's still using this place, Sarah said. At the far end of the room was a locked door marked Server Vault, Archive, 6. Sarah pulled out her phone, scanning a QR code from the leaked docs. It took multiple tries. Her fingers shook. Finally, a green light flashed. The door clicked. They stepped into a narrow room lined with drives, storage reels, and equipment coated in time. The air was cooler. Someone had kept the climate system running. Sarah wiped dust from a label. Operation Cast Peak. Saturn FSV. This is it, Keem said. They connected one of the Saturn terminals to their laptop. It powered on. A black screen appeared, blinking. Restricted. Saturn 123. Enter, pass, Sarah typed furiously. They tried keyword after keyword from the documents. On the third try, the screen blinked. Access. Granted. Files flooded the screen. Pages of data, videos, encrypted emails. Everything pointed to a horrifying truth. Detailed accounts of financial exchanges tied to pre-approved war spending. signed days before the attacks. Entire city blocks listed for demolition with timestamps that didn't match the official narratives. Trade logs showing massive insider stock movements. And beneath it all, notes, annotations, cold and calculated, public fear index rising, legislation window open. Hijackers known, greenlit asset ignition protocol. Sarah read the words, voice hollow. They knew. They used them. Keem sat back, stunned. They planned the fear, profited from it, buried the bodies. Above them, faint. A floorboard creaked. Sarah froze. They're here. The lights from their server blinked red. Power had drawn attention. Copy everything, Keem hissed. He connected external drives. The data began transferring, slowly. Sarah moved toward the room's switch panel. She was ready to kill the lights when a crash upstairs. Heavy boots, pounding down the staircase. Flashlights pierced the gloom. Shouting. Gunfire cracked. Metal pinged and sparked as bullets tore through the server racks. Sarah ducked behind a console and returned fire, her small pistol flashing once, twice. Her hands were slick with sweat. Keem stayed at the console, fingers flying across keys. He switched to satellite mode, uploading the Saturn archive to a secure server. The signal flickered, then locked. Transmission, 10%, 12%. Hold them. Off! He shouted. Then came the voice. Cold. Familiar. Thomas Keem. A man called out, stepping into the doorway. Director Shaw. His silhouette filled the frame, gun raised, flanked by armored watchers. This continuation is intense, cinematic, and thematically powerful. A gripping fusion of political thriller, cyberpunk, and post-truth paranoia. Here's a polished and expanded version of your passage that tightens flow, corrects grammar, and elevates emotional impact while keeping your narrative intact. Stop. Shaw's voice thundered through the steel corridors, reverberating like a war drum. You have no idea what you're unleashing, he growled. The stability of entire alliances depends on burying the complexities of that day. Gunfire answered him. Sarah, bleeding from a graze on her shoulder, gritted her teeth and kept the watchers pinned behind scorched server racks. The upload bar climbed. 50%. 62%. The world was tilting on the edge of revelation. Flash it, Shaw barked. A flashbang clattered into the room. Bang! A white bloom of pain exploded in their skulls. Ears rang. Balance lost. Shadows scrambled. The way watchers swarmed in. Sarah was tackled to the floor, pistol kicked away. Another agent pinned Keem, slamming his laptop under a boot. Crack. The screen fractured. The progress bar froze at 80%, but desperation birthed fury. Keem twisted free, ramming the shattered laptop into the guard's face. The device flickered, miraculously alive. Cables were yanked in a frenzy. One bullet tore through a coolant pipe. Steam hissed. They were losing control. This entire facility could blow. Someone shouted. Shaw advanced, gun aimed at Keem's heart. You can die here clinging to your delusions, or disappear. But either way, that truth dies with you. Suddenly, boom! The severed coolant line exploded. Fire arced down the walls. Watchers scattered. Ceiling tiles crashed. Sparks rained. Keem, bloodied, crawled toward the terminal. The upload bar flickered. 98%. He howled, smashed the final keystroke. Success. A sharp shot echoed. Keem staggered back, chest hit. Darkness swept over him. The watchers ripped at cables, but it was too late. The data had streamed out, buried, in safe nodes, mirrored globally within minutes. Sirens wailed. The building's old emergency systems, half melted by years of neglect, screamed in synthetic agony. Sarah, half conscious, was blown back by the concussive wave of another explosion. Flames engulfed the sub-basement. Director Shaw and his remaining agents escaped into the night. For all they knew, Thomas Keem died under rubble and flame. But they'd already lost the real war. The Saturn files were out. Within hours, torrents of encrypted data poured across the internet. Activists, whistleblowers, archivists, even hobbyist coders raced to download and mirror it. Anonymous forums flared to life. Reddit, Mastodon, the darknet, all swarmed with analysis, screenshots, decrypted fragments. Governments scrambled. Censorship efforts spiked. But the signal was too wide, too fast. The world knew. Headlines exploded. Operation White and Project Switchboard revealed. The day of the attack was engineered. Internal memos confirmed civilian casualties were acceptable losses for strategic gain. Evidence of insider stock moves, journalist complicity, foreign intelligence backchannels, hijackers, controlled assets turned ignition tools. Diplomatic shockwaves erupted. Allies demanded emergency meetings. Washington fumbled for damage control. Rival states called for UN emergency sessions. The documents, verified by digital forensics, timestamps, and metadata, were real. Some bore signatures from senior officials. Others linked directly to pre-attack financial movements and arms contracts awarded days after the bombing. Mid-tier intelligence staffers, their conscience shaken, confirmed the leak's authenticity. Protests exploded globally. Washington, London, Berlin, Tokyo, millions poured into streets. Demands for resignations, arrests, truth. The intelligence establishment faced its biggest legitimacy crisis in history. The White House spun desperately. These documents are forgeries, they claimed, but proof stacked up. Data scientists, archivists, former insiders, all aligned. The digital trail was undeniable. Even former officials came forward, offering partial confessions or vague denials, only fueling public rage. In the US, the collapse began. Mass rallies surged outside government buildings. Wall Street reeled. Defense stocks plummeted. Lawsuits filed. Boards resigned. Corporate giants scrambled to scrub links from their websites. CEOs fled overseas. Retired generals faced subpoenas. Anchors apologized on live TV for parroting state narratives. Some networks still resisted, clinging to jingoistic spins, claiming the leaks endangered national unity. But that only stoked further distrust. As one commentator put it, "You can't close the barn door after the horses fled." Then came the final grasp for power. Director Shaw stood before a jeering press corps, trying to explain. His voice barely carried above the chants. "Justice! Arrest them all! We remember the lies!" Backed into a corner, Shaw's office invoked a national security emergency, declaring a limited martial law to restore order. But that only inflamed dissent further. A country divided by grief, anger, and revelation refused to be silenced. The truth had shattered the old world, and there was no going back. Certain states refused to cooperate. Over the following weeks, the old global alignments began to fracture. Investigations were launched from every angle, with newly emboldened lawmakers prosecuting those who had exploited the post-attack expansions for personal gain. Some resignations came swiftly, others were forced. From the chaos of the southwestern disaster, Sarah Voss emerged, battered but alive. In interviews and testimony, she detailed how the Watchers had infiltrated the abandoned NSA site, how Thomas Keane died a hero finalizing the upload. Her column, One Man's Last Key Press, went viral within hours. With vivid prose, she described how, in a storm of gunfire and flames, Keane delivered the truth to the world with a final keystroke, an act of defiance that ensured the Saturn files would never be buried. The piece reshaped public memory. Keane became a tragic whistleblower, a symbol of personal sacrifice in the pursuit of truth. At the grassroots level, families of 9/11 victims demanded new trials. The old commissions were discredited. People realized reams of contradictory evidence had been sealed. Even original investigators admitted they'd been misled or threatened. The emotional toll surged. For many, it felt like living through the tragedy all over again. only this time with the unbearable weight of betrayal. Wave of national introspection swept the country. How had fear become so profitable? How had good people allowed it? Internationally, allies who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with the US in the war on terror felt profoundly betrayed. Some withdrew forces from contested regions. Others launched parliamentary inquiries of their own, suspecting shared complicity. The world order that had been shaped in the aftermath of 9/11 began to crumble, replaced by an uncertain future. Some dared to hope it meant a less militarized age. Others feared the vacuum might breed new extremism. And through it, all rumors persisted. Keane might still be alive. There were whispers, sightings, grainy photographs. A man in a far-off coastal town, weathered by sun and time, speaking cryptically of governments and illusions, but nothing definitive. Officially, Keane was presumed deceased. If he had survived, he had clearly chosen anonymity, a life in the shadows after revealing so much of the dark. 6 months later, a massive Senate hearing convened. The world watched as ex-generals, CEOs, and administration officials from 20 years prior faced televised grilling. Some pled the Fifth. Others invoked national security. A few, overcome by conscience or calculation, confessed partial roles. Indictments followed. Not all ended in convictions. The system, after all, was vast, intricate, and self-protective. But the symbolic effect was seismic. Never again would the official narrative go unchallenged without scrutiny. Meanwhile, Sarah Voss launched False Skies, an independent media platform dedicated to transparency and investigative truth. Freed from blacklists and editorial pressure, she became a new kind of public figure, a beacon of accountability in an age thirsting for it. Survivors, insiders, and everyday citizens contributed. Documents, testimonies, stories of cover-ups, censorship, and quiet moral reckonings. The platform became a mosaic of voices trying to piece together the truth and heal. 1 year after the Saturn files broke, a new memorial was quietly unveiled near Ground Zero. A single statue, a man, mid-motion, pressing a key. At its base, an inscription. They took truth from us in the shadows. He brought it back into the light. Visitors left flowers, notes, and old news clippings. Some came in grief, others in reverence, many simply to acknowledge that, for the first time in a generation, the machinery of secrecy had blinked. In a quiet coastal village, far from news cameras and protests, a fisherman claimed to recognize a man from a photo. Older now, hair bleached by salt and sun, eyes heavy with memory. They spoke for only a few minutes. The man said he once worked for the government, but no more. He spoke of illusions and the cost of unveiling them. At sunrise, he vanished. In his wake, he left a small battered flash drive in a dry tin. If it was Thomas Keane, he had chosen a wandering fate. Not as a fugitive, but as a man who had already done what needed to be done, letting the world take the next steps. Public trust in large institutions remained shaken. Some remained furious, others quietly hopeful, believing that the truth had finally clawed its way to the surface. In the corners of the internet, conspiracy forums lit up. Was this truly the end of the Watchers? Were new false flags already being planned? Some believed Black Dust, the operation's nickname, was just the first veil peeled back. But for now, the greatest deception of modern times stood exposed. The Saturn files changed the course of history. They used fear to shape the world. But one day, fear lost. The truth soared free, and the illusions that once cloaked the skies were shattered in a single day.